Thank you all for joining us for a workshop on privacy-preserving advertising. There are many people who made this discussion possible. This is day 3 of PrivacyNama, and we'd like to thank Walmart, Meta, Amazon for the support for PrivacyNama, as well as Access Now, CCG at NLU Delhi, and CIS India. We'd like to thank Mozilla and ASCI for their support for this workshop on privacy-preserving advertising. Advertising is at the heart of privacy regulation globally. I've been saying for a few years that we are in the mess that we are in with privacy because of advertising. You know, there's this old saying that 50% of my advertising is going waste. The problem is I don't know which 50%. And so a large part of advertising and the way it's developed with profiling and using algorithms to try and better understand consumer interest and intent has been about reducing the waste in advertising spend and optimizing targeting for advertisers. And so it's important that we also understand the impact that deep profiling, the usage of dark patterns and anonymity in advertising for the advertiser have had on people, on human rights, on elections, and on democracies. And there was a gap in the market. There is a global market failure in privacy. And just as laws are changing, so is technology. So it's our honor to have Manisha Kapoor of the Advertising Standards Council of India, Martin Thompson of Mozilla speak today, and a bunch of startups that look at technology as a means to preserve privacy and manage privacy for companies as well. They'll be demoing their work. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Manisha Kapoor, the CEO of ASCI, to deliver the opening keynote address. Manisha, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Nikhil, and thank you, MediaNama, for inviting me here today. I think this is a topic that should interest every single human being on the earth today, who's connected online. And so whether it is us as citizens, whether it's us as parents, whether it's all of us as consumers going about picking up things online, we do know that much of our lives are now online, and that we are doing of course many things on the internet. It offers us a lot of convenience. It offers us, of course, the ability to make certain choices that hopefully make life easier for us. And I think when it comes to actually data, or the data that we share, I think probably where it started out was that some of that data helps to reduce the friction that we might face, or kind of just makes a site load better. If I don't have to enter my credit card details at all points of time, it helps me as a consumer as well. So there are these reasons, I think, for which it was perhaps originally envisaged that certain data might be collected. But of course, as we know, we've come a long way since then. And today, all of us, while we, I think, appreciate how some collection of data may make the internet work smoother for us, I think the key thing in all of this is really consent and informed consent. Have I consented to receiving advertising messages from someone? And if so, then by all means, I may wish to kind of actually receive, let's say, promotional offers or something from stores I like, or, platforms that I regularly shop from, and that adds a lot of value to my life. However, I may not wish to necessarily be reminded, of a water purifier every 3 days, from someone who's got hold of my number from somewhere. So I think those are, the kind of compromises that we are making, even as we wish to receive perhaps some information that may be relevant to us. So as I said, one of the key things is really informed consent. And I think the, again, challenge with informed consent is that we now have a lot of organizations that are giving in information, but perhaps too much of it. And informed consent can sometimes actually become very overwhelming for an ordinary consumer. you kind of skip through everything and say, I agree, to agreeing to, you actually don't know what you're agreeing to, because, it just seems so complicated. So whether it's sometimes a credit card that you apply for, even in the offline world, or kind of agree to privacy policies of organizations, we've seen that, as ordinary consumers, we perhaps don't know what we are signing to. And, again, so that in fact has become a point of friction, right? That you now require me to go through a 10-page document to understand what it is that you need my data for. So I think, so this whole thing of overwhelming information in kind of seeking consent is a challenge. I think the other challenges, I think, as Nikhil mentioned earlier, the use of dark patterns, and they can be as innocuous as saying that I agree, and then in really tiny print it says more options, and those more options may be things that you prefer. So again, I think when shareholder value is sought to be derived at the expense of consumer value, at the expense of consumer experience, is where perhaps things start to go a little wrong. So an option which the consumer may prefer should be as prominent, or could be as prominently placed as the options that go in favor of the organization. So I think these are again small patterns that are used in UI UX designs, which which are called dark patterns and have been a matter of study for a few years now. I think another issue for us to look at is really the asymmetry between the consumer here and the organizations that are kind of seeking your data, right? As I mentioned, this overwhelming information about what is the right choice to make, use of terms that may be confusing. All of these actually compromise the consumer's ability to take an informed choice. And I think honest advertisers would of course want consumers, and they want to acquire consumers, and that's their business. But if you are able to do it in a more equitable way, that makes for a fair kind of consumer experience. I think what advertisers would also do well to remember is that in the long term, by destroying too much of consumer value, you actually move consumers elsewhere. Consumers don't want to visit sites that perhaps are asking for too much information, or that they hear about these things even in other places, saying that your data has kind of got misused in a certain way, or used for beyond the purpose for which you thought you were sharing it. And once you start to kind of dismantle consumer experience and consumer loyalty, you make it actually more expensive for businesses to acquire consumers, because consumers are now going to turn away from mainstream advertising or any messages that you put out if you are kind of regarded as not terribly honest in these matters. So eventually it actually increases the cost of business if you compromise consumer value as well, over the long term. In the short term, some of these things unfortunately do work. And eventually when you kind of, destroy consumer experience, or you push, that too much, what happens is that besides the consumers walking away, you also invite maybe a disproportionate amount of regulatory scrutiny, which again, could come in the way of your business models, could come in the way of how you actually, go about acquiring consumers. So again, that has a cost implication and creates friction for the business itself. I think there was also, initially Nikhil and I were also discussing that, what's your consumer acquisition model, and, what does it depend on, and does it really depend on taking more information that the consumers want to give you, and that you're kind of tricking them into, sharing or parting with more information. And if indeed your business model or communication model or acquisition model is built on some of these, unfair practices, as one might call them, then again, like I said, either consumers will turn away themselves as they get more educated, or regulation will clamp down on these practices. So to my mind, I think, privacy is an important aspect both for consumers and for businesses. Businesses want your data to create some value for themselves. But like I said earlier, it also does create some value for consumers in terms of, ease of operations. I know I have been complaining over the last few days where RBI, I think, kind of did a reboot on all your cards saved on all e-commerce site, and I'm having to enter my card details all over again for every transaction. So it is a pain, and I think consumers do understand that there is a trade-off between sharing or companies storing your data versus the ease of using what you would like to kind of be online for. But so long as, again, that is informed consent, I think those issues go away. So I think net what we are saying is that if advertising is looking at the privacy discussion in a more sustainable way, and that's really what the long term can work on, is a sustainable way of doing business and a sustainable way of engaging with your consumers, then how do we ask for consent? How do we make sure that the information we give them is not overwhelming? How do we not suppress choices and in presenting choices that consumers might find more preferred choices, and not just the choice that favors the advertiser or the platform in a disproportionate way? And how do we kind of transparently also share what we are using this data for? And I think those are the kind of issues that make it fair for consumers to interact with advertising. And I think that really becomes the way in which consumer data is kind of verified and seen, and that kind of becomes the way in which brands and advertisers start to operate. So that's something that I had to kind of share with all of you. But I'm happy to seek any questions that you may have, or take the agenda forward. So
I had some questions, Manisha. One of the things that you also mentioned was about consent, and there is an immense amount of consent fatigue out there. Like just about half an hour ago, I was reporting some spam on Twitter, and Twitter made me go through. I actually took a video of it to put it up later. Twitter made me go through 4 different pages, with some of them with 6 different options for types of reporting, just in order to report someone who was very clearly spamming me, and that spam could have been detected by algorithms because there's regular crypto spam which one gets hit with on Twitter all the time. So that's reporting fatigue. There's also consent fatigue. There was an experiment, I think, that was done where, or maybe it's a joke, that someone put in the terms and conditions that you'll name your firstborn child ABC, and people clicked I agree. So while consent is seen as a means of enabling consumer choice, there's also every time it pops up that do you agree to share your cookies, and you just blindly click I agree, or you etc. So where does this end? Is the solution what we're seeing are regulatory solutions to these problems, which perhaps will not work? Is the solution in regulation, or is it in technology?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think, all of us have been, at the receiving end, and we have, God knows, between even all the panelists over here, agreed to how many things, who knows what's going to kind of hold us in the future and what ransom we are going to be held to. But it's absolutely right. I think this overwhelming, information that consumers are drowned in. If I recollect, maybe even a couple of decades ago, when credit cards were becoming popular and you were kind of signing off things saying that, I agree, and like I said, that started in an offline world, but today in the online world, that is so much more, of a challenge. And I think, of course, both regulation and technology have a role to play. I don't think either of them, can be divorced from each other anymore, in any case. And I think, I'm, for example, looking forward to seeing some of the technology solutions that are there, because I think regulatory solutions will exist, but eventually the kind of, just the scale of, the activities that happen on the internet. I mean, you may have regulation, but you have to be able to use technology to either monitor it or to prevent it. And, therefore, I feel that technology needs to come in very, very strongly. And I think the solutions of the future will lie there at ASCI, which is the Advertising Standards Council of India. So not for privacy issues particularly, but just to monitor misleading ads, for example. We've had to deploy artificial intelligence-based systems. So I don't think that there is any getting away from technology as a means to solve some of the problems that perhaps have been created by technology in the first place.
Right, and you had also issued guidelines around crypto advertising, and so much of the advertising is blind. As in, it's difficult to identify who's advertising, where that ad is going. How do you monitor ads and how they're being deployed, and what kind of advertising, whether it's misleading or not, that's being deployed at planet scale?
Yeah, so I think at planet scale, that's an interesting word. I think it certainly describes the kind of challenges we have. But I think, for example, we started to look at influencers as a category. And again, there are challenges in how do you identify whether a piece of communication is an ad or not, right? I mean, the lines between content and advertising, they're just so blurry right now. So I think the key thing is, constantly kind of looking out for options and technologies that will help us to monitor this better. We've deployed something which is an artificial intelligence based, software to look at ads, and ads themselves, right? They are morphing character at all points of time. We were earlier looking at print and TV ads. Of course, we have digital, but just the amounts of formats we have seen in digital that are also morphing regularly. I think it's a challenge again for, I think, all stakeholders to come together. I don't think singularly that whether it's the government, whether it's a self-regulatory body like ours, or whether it's the technology partners. I think people who intend to get this right and have a vested interest in getting this right, need to come together and support each other. Because as you said, I mean, this problem is a planet scale problem. And I don't think anyone individually with their mandate can kind of address it. I mean, we can all become sharper at what we do by the use of technology, but finally it needs a coming together of different kinds of knowledge domains and expertise and reach to make this possible.
There is also a question of how do you, when such mechanisms are successful for advertisers, in terms of profiling, targeting, spamming, how does an industry change? I remember back in 2010, we had a situation where Club Mahindra, in its earnings conference call somewhere around 2011-12, when the TRAI banned SMS spam in India, you had a listed company telling its investors that their customer acquisition had nosedived because they were almost entirely reliant on messaging people, and leave aside there was substantial amount of unsolicited messaging taking place, which was spam. Even I'd reported it on a bunch of occasions, and their customer acquisition just nosedived once those regulations came in. So why will advertisers change?
So I think, in fact, here there are again a couple of things. I think advertisers will always be interested in targeting and profiling, right? I mean, it's pretty much the basis of their business. So whether it was through TV programs earlier, and you kind of did that, of course, with technology, you're able to kind of personally profile individual consumers rather than just cohorts of consumers. So I think advertising will always be interested. Why would they change? I think the difference between targeting and profiling versus spamming needs to be understood. And again, one could be useful to both consumers and advertisers, but spamming is certainly, again, it's kind of focusing on stakeholder value, compromising consumer value, and consuming consumer loyalty. And I think it's exactly what happened in the case that you shared with us, that someone will come down. So it's about how much can you get away with, and then if it comes in with a heavy hand, and if you're inviting a heavy hand of regulation, then eventually the cost for your own businesses go up. So I think what happens is that advertisers, particularly the ones who want to get it right in the long term, who are here for the long term benefit, and who believe that their brand has a long term play, I think need to actively come and say that this is not okay. They need to actively come and say that, look, guys, what is the line that we are crossing over here? And, can we stay within the bounds of what we are? Because someone else will come and do it if you don't do it. That's what we've seen, right? I mean, that's how the world works, that somebody will step in to maintain or to bring back an equilibrium if you've kind of moved too much to one side. And we've seen that happen in in Europe. We've seen that happen in the US. So it's not long before I think we see some of this happen in India as well, if we find that advertisers don't kind of take in. And I think the key thing, again, like I keep saying, is that honest advertisers need to step in, and they need to kind of hold the flag for this kind of a fair use of the internet and of privacy and of data, because like I said, if the industry doesn't do it, somebody else will come and do it for them.
There's a question from Radhika. She says that there is also a problem of regulatory frustration with the endless progress in technology, especially when we try to centralize these regulations to direct big companies and social media platforms. Gillian Hadfield in her book, Rules for a Flat World, talks about how companies like Google, given their mass digital outreach, come out with self-regulation and policies that broadly meet local benchmarks, but are carried out independently and behind closed doors. In the context of Google AdWords, advertisements in digital markets, and various trademark infringement cases, courts are then blindsided in determining private rights and holding these companies responsible. Would you have any opinion on how to level this dilemma?
Yeah, I think it's a dilemma we also as self-regulators face, and you're absolutely right that it is it's an uphill task. I won't deny it. I think one of the things that we are doing actually as a result of this, and so I mean, a self-regulator can do it. A regulator, may not necessarily have that as its central mandate. Is how do you move the point of regulation or self-regulation from the point of publication or post-publication to the point of creation and planning? And that, unfortunately, may need the kind of a planet scale education effort, a kind of, how do you kind of tell people what are the rules and how do you encourage them to get it right? Because whatever you can do post-publication is largely symbolic and could be demonstrative. But the only way to prevent something like this from happening is education, is sensitization. And as boring as that may sound, and as long-term that may sound, that is really the only way to do it. We've seen, I'll go to one of my favorite examples, traffic rules. And, I think regulators can't be the cops standing on the other side of the signal waiting to catch you. I think we have to put in a disproportionate effort on educating you about traffic rules, and, what and why they are necessary and why it's important for everyone's safety, that the entire ecosystem gains when you have rules that are followed. So I think for us, that shift from just merely being, post the point of production and publication to being much earlier in the creative process or in the advertising process is very, very critical. It's not going to be easy, certainly. But I think, again, all the right-minded stakeholders need to come together to make that happen.
Perhaps one part of the answer lies in transparency regarding how companies got your data. I was just thinking about data brokers, and when users are able to question how an entity got their data, that will then perhaps address both sides of the problem, which is companies selling data when they get them, and on the other side, companies buying data in order to target. Otherwise, the benefits perhaps outweigh the risks. And as long as that remains the same, entrepreneurs will always do that cost-benefit analysis and try and break the rules, which they tend to do.
Yeah, no, I think transparency, of course, I think in, just where your data. So in a sense, I mean, if you think of your data as an asset, and, who's kind of got the custody of that asset as it moves down different paths, I think is a great, kind of mandate to have, which is a disclosure on where you have acquired data from. Otherwise, your lists are being sold and bought, to the lowest or the highest bidder rather. And then you are kind of receiving calls and messages about all kinds of things that you don't need in your life.
Thank you so much for joining us, Manisha. And thank you for the work that ASCI does. I look forward to seeing more activity there on the digital front. And I guess as the privacy bill comes in, your task as well as ours will be cut out in terms of getting the industry to adapt to newer privacy norms, which they're probably not used to. And here's hoping that they start adapting before any regulation comes out in any case.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nikhil and MediaNama. Thank you.
Thanks. We'll move on now to a session that I'm pretty excited about. We have 3 startups that work in different aspects in terms of preserving privacy for consumers. I'd like to invite Aditya from Dusra to talk about the solution that Dusra gives to consumers and how he chanced upon this idea. Aditya?
Hi, Nikhil. Can you hear me?
Yes, can't see you though.
One second. My bad. Should be able to see me now.
Yes, I like your t-shirt.
Thank you. I thought in the spirit of PrivacyNama, I thought I'll wear my very obvious privacy t-shirt by Dusra. Cool. Thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity, Nikhil. Is it okay if I present a couple of slides just as a walk along?
Please.
Yeah. Let me share my screen.
Do you have screen sharing rights?
Yeah, I think I'm just trying to figure this out. Okay. I think while we kick this off, do want to give a little bit of background about myself, which I think will set the context in some ways of why I feel so passionately about what we are doing. This is my sort of my 3rd startup, I would say. First company. I have a background in ad tech. Having done sort of, built one of the earlier behavioral targeting engines and stuff like that over the last almost 17 years now. Started a company called MediaMint, which is a fairly scaled up digital marketing operations company. So we work with a lot of publishers across the world. We work with a lot of agencies just in terms of being able to help set up and run these campaigns. So what this has given me is some understanding of how data is kind of used across the digital advertising ecosystem. After MediaMint, started MediaMint in 2010, about a few years later, started working in the whole identity space, but specifically around unstructured addresses in India. And this was an area that I was very passionate about, and where, in general, because addresses are so sort of random in the way that they're written down across the country, we felt that there was a way to standardize unstructured addresses. So started working on that problem in 2013. And then sort of, as we're sort of going through the journey, one of the things that I had noticed in India was that the mobile number, which sort of became a person identifier in the last, I would say, almost 10, 15 years. I remember back in 2007 and 8, people would tell about Domino's customer experience. They would say that, the moment I called Domino's, they identified me and called me out by name. Hi, Aditya, what would you like to order? That almost felt like magic at that point of time, where people are like, oh, this business knows something about me. It is able to recognize me as a customer. So people were very excited, right? So in general, the mobile numbers was that at least as far as I remember, was the first time that the mobile number was used as from a large scale as a customer identifier. Now, obviously, one thing led to another, and a lot of companies did not just start using it as a CRM identifier, but also started using it for marketing purposes. And that's when things got very ugly. I remember a few years ago, I'd walked into a sporting goods store, and I wanted to buy something. I was willing to give cash, so I picked up my products, went to the counter, And I told them, I'd like to buy. And then they said, sir, we need your mobile number. Obviously I come from an ad tech background, so it, I kind of knew how data would potentially be used and misused. So I said, hey, I don't want to give my mobile number. I just like to buy my stuff and move on. They said, no, we can't bill you for these products if you don't give your mobile number. So that day I got really frustrated, because I kind of saw where India was heading, where businesses felt that they could almost soft mandate gullible customers into giving out their mobile number. So for me, the whole journey did not start as much about privacy as about the whole idea of our customer experience being so poor, where you as a customer did not have control on what was happening in a commercial transaction. So I walked away that day, but ended up getting myself a second SIM card. And I started using that second SIM card for a long time. But I also as you sort of start thinking about the problem a lot more, you realize that this is a very clunky way of solving the problem, where you're carrying either two SIM cards in a single phone, or worse still, carrying two phones. My background in the whole identity space for addresses that I was doing, I said, hey, why don't we give this a shot, where we talk to telecom operators and try to come up with a virtual mobile number that people can have as a secondary number, right? So we started working in early 2018. We reached out to a bunch of telecom operators, and they said, hey, can you kind of almost curate this product for us? And they did, and that's how the whole journey of Doosra started. We spent about a year and a half, putting all of the pieces of the telecom stack together, and then figuring out the pricing. That was the other piece. Obviously we were trying to solve the problem of making sure that your data does not get misused. And a lot of the internet companies, even now and at that point of time, even more obviously, were basically giving you the product for free, but and using your data for monetization. We were very clear that we didn't want to go in that direction, and for us, the positioning of privacy became that much more important. And essentially, that's how Doosra was born. So if you look at Doosra, what it is today, it's basically a second mobile number. It's a virtual number, so you can go on to doosra.com, sign up, and get yourself a second number. And to give it places where you're uncomfortable sharing your personal mobile number. And the one big difference that I tell people about Doosra versus a regular SIM card is that Doosra works exactly the reverse of how a mobile number works today. Today, if somebody has your mobile number, they can call you, and you can block them after the fact, right? So let's say a telemarketer calls you, you can block that number, and then they will call you from a second number, and then from a third number, and then from a fourth number. And that's how we got to where we are today. With Doosra, essentially, it's exactly the reverse. So you can give it at all the public places that you want it, that you are uncomfortable giving your personal number, and all calls are blocked by default. But you can allow certain calls to come through based on whatever rules that you establish, right? Let's say you wanted to specifically receive calls from a number, you can add them as a whitelisted contact. And if that person calls you from that number, the call gets forwarded to your primary number. So people basically sign up on the website, download our app, and manage all of their call settings and all of that through the Doosra app. And our revenue model is fairly simple, Nikhil. We spoke about this earlier. We charge a subscription fee, $9.99 per year or whatever, $7.49 for 6 months, $9.99 for a year. And essentially, that's what we tell our customers. This is my way of building a viable business. So I don't need to do anything else with your data. For me, I have neither an intention nor the incentive to do to broker. I use the word data brokering, which is a fairly common approach in most internet-based companies that are given out for free. So we're trying to sort of take a different tack and say, okay, people will pay for this, they will subscribe to our service, and it's a simple kind of business model. So in general, I think when we started off the project, we sort of recognized that the whole privacy market may be a little bit smaller, but over the next 10 or 15 years, it is going to scale up significantly. I guess I can take the question. How do we get the invoice for the purchase if we give the virtual number? So all SMSs to a Dusra number come into the Dusra app. So if they were to send you any sort of communication that shows up as an SMS, you receive incoming SMSs. And if you've turned off the call blocker, you receive incoming calls as well. Usually people send in their send a link or something like that, where you can download your invoices. So essentially, the whole idea behind Dusra is it should work everywhere where you're expected to give a mobile number. And because these are telecom issued virtual mobile numbers, a business cannot really differentiate between, hey, you gave me a Dusra number or you gave me your personal mobile number. And I believe in some ways it gives you back control of how you think about business communication. Essentially, this is the one slide that I wanted to cover. Nikhil, happy to take any questions. I know that a couple that came in.
There's another question about information from. If you could put the slide down, let's have a.
Sorry, yeah.
So,
Sure.
Will information from third parties trying to contact customers that goes through the Dusra app be used by Dusra for any form of profiling?
No. The categorical answer is no. Obviously, for us, there's a certain thesis on which we've built the business, and for us, we absolutely stand true to it.
Okay, I'm curious about how you would like what's the filtration mechanism for messaging or messages that you receive, because quite often you see telemarketers use the transaction pipe for sending promotional messages. How do you filter that out, or how do you distinguish?
Yeah, we don't, right? I mean, we run, the only ML we run is to identify OTPs in our system as the transactions are coming through, as the messages are coming through. We say, okay, does this fit the pattern of an OTP, so that we are able to highlight it. Other than that, we don't do any kind of filtration, Nikhil. That runs the challenge of a lot of like junk SMSs coming through to your Dusra app. And our take on that is essentially this is like your disposable email or your disposable phone number, right? Like this is where all your junk comes. So you actually don't even bother looking at the SMSs that come into your Dusra app, except for places where you're giving it to sign up on a platform. Let's say you're going to Swiggy and signing up, right? At that point of time, you're actively seeking an SMS to come from that platform. So you will go in, get that OTP, and then continue with your registration process. So at this point of time, there's no filtration that is done, and we believe that this is an SMS inbox that should be ignored rather than be focused upon.
What about delivery agents trying to contact you when they're delivering something?
True. So I think this is an interesting use case that we saw. And what we've done is basically tied up with Swiggy, Zomato, Dunzo, some of these more popular delivery apps. And when they call you, right, essentially it comes through a certain landline number that you must have seen. So you've basically spoken to all these companies and say, hey, give us those list of numbers through which your agents will call. And we will basically aggregate them and put them as a on-off toggle within the Dusra app. So in Dusra, you have something called trusted services, where if I turn Swiggy on, then essentially any delivery person that is calling through the calling your Dusra number, that call will not get blocked, but get forwarded over to you. So essentially, we've taken that use case, at least addressed it to some extent for all of the popular platforms.
Understood. But is this two popular platforms, or is this perhaps, or are you also tying up with delivery companies like Delivery, etc.?
Yeah, so a lot of these guys like Delivery and some of these guys do not have, like anybody that uses a cloud telephony system to route all of their calls through a certain set of numbers, we are able to identify, aggregate and make that available, right? But if they're calling, if there's no masking that is done, then it is difficult for us also to identify. So in that case, what we tell people is, hey, just turn off the call blocker when you're receiving your, let's say I'm receiving a some sort of a delivery today. You turn off the call blocker for the next 4 hours or so, and once it comes back on, once the delivery is done, you can turn it back on. It's not the most ideal solution, but we're trying to think of ways to do this without infringing on trying to identify who the caller is through some sort of caller ID system and stuff like that, right? Which again infringes on privacy. So we're trying to sort of figure out how do you provide the most value without having to, use data that is that we then have to either buy from somewhere, or we end up using people's contact book, which we don't want to.
So 2 quick questions. One is from an anonymous attendee, and thank you for being anonymous. Is there any linkage to the real identity with the Doosra app, and how is KYC done?
So there is a linkage to the real identity because we are a licensed virtual network operator, and as part of DOT regulations, we do have to do KYC. So that KYC, we do it through the app. So once you sign up for Doosra, before you start using the service, you essentially do an e-KYC, which is we ask you to upload your any of the approved forms of identity, whether it's voter ID, passport, driver's license, or Aadhaar, and then we match it against the selfie, which is what a lot of e-KYC platforms do, and that's how we are able to identify that you're a legitimate user. Again, one thing I do want to comment on is, there's a difference, at least I'm starting to notice, between privacy and secrecy, right? So this is not a VPN kind of product that allows you to remain anonymous to everybody, right? This is a product that is intended to be used in places where you're uncomfortable sharing your personal number. We will have to retain your real identity, but as I had mentioned, for me, my business model is fairly simple, so I don't need to do anything else other than collect subscription revenue from you to run the platform.
Just quickly related, will it keep a track of the services used by the customers subscribed?
No. So all of the SMSs and stuff like that, as soon as they hit our system, get encrypted, and they get decrypted only on the device.
Can we change our Doosra numbers frequently? Do they get assigned to others?
Recycling is a very big problem in general in the telecom industry. So let's say you sign up for like a 1-year plan, and then you decide not to renew your Doosra subscription. What we do is we put that number in. So one thing that we do a check against after you've sort of given up your number, we do a check against popular platforms like WhatsApp or whatever. Hey, is this number signed up on WhatsApp? We will deregister those numbers, try to sanitize them as much as possible. For about 6 months, we don't use that number, and then we put it up for reuse. Otherwise, we end up in a scenario where you just end up not having enough inventory available.
Last question. Sorry, there are more questions coming in, so I'll quickly run through them. How will whitelisting by customers work? Do they review the numbers provided by Doosra that contacted them, or will they be sent real-time notifications, in which case is spamming unavoidable?
No, so essentially all whitelisting, you decide the whitelist. So you add a specific number as a trusted contact within the Doosra app. And if that person calls you from that number, I'll give you an example. Let's say go to pharmacy, right? That guy says certain medicines are not available. So can you, I'll call you, madam, when the medicines are available, in which case you take the pharmacist's number and add that as a trusted contact. And if that person calls you from that number, it will come through. Otherwise, if he ends up giving that number to 10 other people, it won't.
Is Doosra usage recommended for bank, Aadhaar, OTPs, etc.? How do you ensure security?
Right. So so I think this is an interesting thing. So from a bank standpoint, I use it for my bank, and one of the things that I have noticed, which is a limitation of Doosra, is that you cannot use it for UPI, because in the case of UPI, you need to authenticate that numbers by sending an outgoing SMS, which Doosra does not allow. So as a result of that, for UPI you cannot use it, but for everything else, you can.
So one question, and I'd asked you that before, but I think everyone might have this question as well. The mobile number is increasingly being seen as a unique identity or a proxy to a unique identity. How do you prevent profiling of a customer on the basis of their Doosra number?
Right. So, this is a difficult one because, even if it wasn't a mobile number, even if it was some random 20-digit number, right? But if you saw the same 20-digit number across multiple platforms, you could potentially do profiling. But the idea behind Doosra is that, we basically give you the power to decide at what places do you want to give your primary number, your personal number, and what places do you want to give this alternate digital identity. So in some ways, we're sort of giving you back control. and hoping that you will figure out, Acha, for shopping, I want to use this. For something else, I want to use my personal number. Probably in the future, we'll allow you to, purchase multiple Dusra numbers. So you will be able to use one for dating, one for business. So the whole idea is you should be able to create multiple or alternate digital identities.
Oh, so you don't allow multiple numbers?
Today it's 1:1, but that's more of a tech limitation and us being a little bit more conservative in terms of preventing abuse. But now 2 years in, we're very comfortable because we do take eKYC and stuff like that. We will start allowing multiple Dusra numbers soon.
Okay, last question. Partha is asking about whether Dusra has applied zero knowledge proof in its design.
I'll be very blunt in my answer. I don't have the best of insights on how zero knowledge proof works, but assuming, because we have real identity of the user as part of our entire process, I cannot claim zero knowledge proof.
Fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for sharing all of this and taking all of these questions. That was like a rapid fire round. Thank you for your time.
Cool.
This is
Thanks
fun.
a lot, Nikhil.
Great, and love the t-shirt, man. Thanks.
Thank you.
So that's okay. Thanks. I'll hand over to Aarti now.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks so much for that, Aditya. Up next, we have Abhilash Soundarajan from PrivacyNama, Bangalore-based, and he will be walking us through their products of privacy preserving ad tech.
Yeah, Ati, thank you so much for having me. Thanks, PrivacyNama, for having me as part of the session. Can we start the quick talk and presentation?
Yes, please. Please go ahead.
Sure. Just sharing my screen. Let me know once you're able to see my screen.
You're visible.
Okay, thank you. So we had a lot of interesting discussion earlier from Manisha Kapoor and now from Dusra. It was really exciting to hear. Now, one of the very important and interesting things that Ms. Manisha told was we need technologies to monitor the risk and mitigate that. And they have a team, not for privacy, but for something else, but this is needed. This is a very fundamental problem. And this is what we are trying to solve for businesses. And this needs to be done at a planet scale, as we were having a similar discussion earlier. So the whole premise of what we are trying to do is that there is a significant gap. Once again, this point was also discussed of a need for education and planning right at the beginning, which is like privacy by default and privacy by design, which is very important in data flows. So how do you do that? Once again, in the Dusra discussion as well, we had questions on, how this can establish trust and how can this be used only for specific things? How can linkage not happen? All these. And once again, we were also discussing about how linkage can happen with a 20-digit number, though it's not an actual phone number, it can still help in linking. So I think the audience is beautifully set up for this discussion with the earlier discussions. And this is exactly what we are going to discuss in this quick talk and demo. We are also going to have a demo, but before that, I will quickly run you through what we are doing and then a very quick glance at the demo of the product so that you can get the perspective, and then we can have a quick question and answer session. So if data is a new oil, which is a cliche now, internet and devices are the new oil field, and privacy technologies are the new refineries, and AI systems are the new engines. And today, unfortunately, we are missing this privacy tech refinery layer, and that is what we are intending to build for businesses. This is more B2B than B2C, but in the process, it enables businesses to meet regulatory requirements and protect privacy of their customers while they are sharing and analyzing user data. So about us, we are a privacy deep tech research firm. We have filed around 5 patents. We have won Niti Aayog's Atmanirbhar Bharat Challenge Award for privacy preserved data collaboration. We have won Data Security Council of India's award on privacy due diligence and privacy preservation. We are working closely with customers across the globe from Europe, US, India, Japan, and we are also working with cloud platforms. We are closely tied with AWS. In fact, we are collaborating with them in building something which is for planet scale usage and things like those. And we are working with academia like IISc. One of the IISc professors is our technical advisor, and we are also working with policy think tanks, providing our thoughts about privacy regulations and privacy tech. And what we are building is foundational in the sense that it is mathematical in nature, so it meets regulatory requirements across the globe, whether it be GDPR, CPRA, standard contractual classes of SEC, or India's draft bill, or the bill that would probably come up soon. And this is applicable across industry verticals. We are speaking about advertisement industry. We have one customer from a European advertisement industry who is using our products. So it's a very, very interesting space. And what we are doing is, like in cybersecurity, you have ability to visualize the risk in your network and then visualize the risk and mitigate the risk. So probably you can scan and understand the risk in your ecosystem and mitigate the risk with a firewall or antivirus and anti-spam, right? So how to do it for privacy was a question that struck us, and then that's what we started building. So the first product that we are going to look at today is called Privacy X-ray, which will help visualize the privacy risks in a data set, right? Is it linkable? Can I be identified from the data set? What kind of risks involved? What is the gap between regulatory requirements and technical requirements, and mitigate this? So this is what the first product is about, Privacy X-ray. Event Horizon is a privacy risk mitigation product when you are actually sharing data with downstream parties or even internally as per the consent. You don't want to go beyond the consent, but still process the data. You can privacy preserve the data, beyond which the data would not be considered as personal data, and the regulatory requirements would not be as stringent as it is for personal data. So Event Horizon helps in privacy preservation of data so that you can unlock data for value creation downstream. So these are the two products. We will have a look on these products shortly. But how do these get used by industry today? How can businesses use this? For that, let's look at how customers use it, how the flow naturally happens, who is the target audience, and who uses this. So as per the privacy regulatory requirements, organizations need to have probably a data protection officer. If not, a CISO typically takes up, or a legal team takes up the role of a DPO within an organization, or you can also have external consultants. So today, this is a emerging area, but they require tools and technologies to meet their day-to-day operational requirements. And today, the kind of tools available are very, very minimal. It's sort of a blue field. It's a green field and a blue ocean. And this requires tools and technologies. And this is what we are building with Privacy X-ray and Event Horizon. So let us say there is a product team, and the product team, let us say, it can be a healthcare product, which is very sensitive by nature. And this data can be useful for, let us say, planning supply chain of medicine, which can save lives. Or it can be used for downstream, let us say, can be given to a pharma company so that they can do accelerated drug discovery. Or it can be given to a government agency so that they can, their health ecosystem can work more effectively and prevent spread of diseases and things like those. But in all these scenarios, data needs to be shared with downstream parties. And when this happens, there is a lot of risk involved and re-identification possible with the contemporary methods of masking, tokenization, etc. So first of all, when the data is shared, and this is why de-identification and some forms of anonymization are considered to be ineffective in today's ecosystem. So when the data needs to be shared either internally or externally by an organization before processing, so this can be given to the legal team or a DPO or a CISO who can run it on Privacy X-ray and visualize the privacy risk in the data. So we are building first of its kind privacy threat modeling and privacy risk visualization in data. We are also incorporating world's first privacy threat modeling framework called Linden. We have also been working closely with the European team of Linden. So we have incorporated some of those recommendations, but we visualize the risk first, understand what kind of attacks are possible on the data in re-identifying the individual, and then say that this amount of risk is present in the data with a very detailed report that this is the level of risk and these are the reasons why this risk is present in the data. Once again, education and awareness is a very important concept because DPO may be technically aware of the privacy concepts, but the product team and other teams which are collaborating, let us say the DevOps team and other teams may not be cognizant of the risk involved and regulatory requirements involved in data collaboration. So awareness is very, very important. Privacy is more of a culture and a journey within an organization. So this privacy X-ray enables in building this understanding of risk and visualizing risk and communicating with multiple parties, multiple stakeholders in the ecosystem. And once this is done, the product team can, or the data holder or the data controller can decide how to privacy preserve the data. One of the products that we have is Event Horizon, which is for privacy preservation of data. There can be other modes of privacy preservation as well. This uses PET technologies, including differential privacy and some of the generalization methods, and then it can help in privacy preservation of data. Now, this privacy preserved data can once again be given to the DPO, and then he can visualize the risk. Now, if you can see, the privacy risk has come down from 85 to 15. And then he says that, okay, this is acceptable for business collaboration for this specific use case. Then the data starts flowing stream. This way, either this collaboration is internal or external, this can significantly balance between the privacy risk in data ecosystems and the utility of data downstream, and empower DPOs, legal teams, CISOs, consultants in unlocking data for businesses without too much of restrictions. It's a huge value proposition. And the way Event Horizon works is the Event Horizon, first you can design the requirements for privacy preservation and anonymization in a given context. So it runs multiple AI-based models and algorithms and transforms the data based on the requirement of downstream. So if it's an AI company requiring data for a specific purpose, the data can be privacy preserved in a different way. For marketing agencies which want to understand, not profile people, but to understand patterns in the target audience, what kind of age group, what kind of people, in which segment, what are their wants, needs, etc. So those can be understood from the data without it being personally identifiable or re-identifiable information. So this is what privacy Event Horizon does. And what we do is this can be plugged into data pipelines of organizations, thus automating entire privacy flow within data ecosystems. So let us say, a healthcare organization wanting to share data with different kinds of companies, right? One with pharma company, one with insurance company, one with government agencies. So initially, let us say the risk of the data is 63.9. Then they say that, okay, the risk needs to be reduced for downstream data sharing, and this needs to be within these limits for downstream collaboration. So they can configure the requirement of privacy preservation and then run it through Event Horizon. It automatically generates downstream data streams, and that can be shared with downstream parties with specific levels of privacy risk, which is acceptable to business for those contexts and as per consent provided by users as well. So this significantly empowers a business in data collaboration, at the same time protects people's privacy. So in the process, we are transforming data pipelines and making them from privacy blind to privacy aware and privacy conscious, and this is automated. So this significantly reduces the time taken in decision making. For example, data protection impact assessment is a critical requirement, but it takes 2 to 4 weeks time in today because it is being done manually. So this can significantly accelerate the process and reduce it to almost 5 minutes. Looking in detail into privacy, very in-depth privacy attacks like singling out, linkage, inference, outlier, bunch of attacks on the data, and provides a very detailed report. So identification can be reduced by almost 4,000x. It can be made faster. Similarly, governance, control in terms of reducing the risk, communication in terms of increasing awareness with the ecosystem, protecting the privacy of people whose data is involved, and transferring data across the globe. Cross-border transfer is, very significantly protected across the globe. And this can be protected once the data is privacy preserved, then the data can flow across boundaries. So thus, it significantly accelerates data flow, which is privacy compliant, and at the same time, the business security is achieved. So this is what we do. Quickly going on to demo. So this is a, this is a UI. It can also be done via APIs for data flow. So all, let us say a hospital, right? Hospital has data and it's want to share data with some downstream party, let us say a pharma company. So let us say they have some information which is location specific health information. So they can run the report and then the report would be generated. We just triggered the report. The report would be generated after the processing is completed. In the meanwhile, we can quickly have a look at the data. Let us say the data is like this, where you have a uniquely identifiable patient token. Though there is no PII, there is age, gender, location, lat long, RT-PCR test result, date of infection, and bunch of other information like payment, which hospital, what medication, etc. This is very, very sensitive. But there is no PII. So not having PII does not mean that the data is secure. So when you run a report, this is the privacy X-ray report that you can see. So it says, it gives a unified privacy risk score. It says the risk score of this data is high, though it does not have PII, the score risk is more than 50. There is a unique identifier. It classifies using AI. It classifies different kinds of data, quasi-identifier, statistical data, statistical, numeric, etc. And then it provides a heat map of which attributes are leaking maximum risk in different privacy risk in different scenarios. And then we also do a lot of privacy attack simulation. Those reports are mentioned here, what level of risk is present for different kinds of attacks. And then
I'm just curious about one thing, Abhilash. Your data is never as clean as what you're showing it to be.
Yeah.
How does it work in those scenarios? Because you may have it's quite often badly tagged or improperly tagged. It's how do you deal with it in that kind of a scenario?
Correct. So we look at, for example, we got a healthcare data where majority of the columns were blank. For example, doctors, when they write prescriptions, they miss a lot of fields. And when it is digitalized, it misses a lot of information. But even then, we would be able to, this is basically algorithmic, right? We would be able to identify this. But this applies only for structured data. We are doing only structured data today, and this applies for it. Even if there are a lot of blank values in data and the data is not clean, that is taken care of to significant amount.
Secondly, is it necessary in your system to directly upload CSV files and quite often you really don't want to extract the data set onto a file and then upload it somewhere. Do you also directly integrate with systems? And in that case, what is the level of security that you provide to your access and processing of data? Because that increases the privacy risk the moment you allow a third-party access, right?
Absolutely. So what we do is we deploy this in customer premises. We don't typically recommend this to be, external service. So we integrate our algorithm with the data so that the data need not leave customer premise or customer cloud. So when the data is made available, the algorithm goes and meets the data in the customer ecosystem. So we don't get access to any data. So the risk is visualized by customer and then decision is made.
So the question from an anonymous attendee: what are the classifiers used by Event Horizon for identifying and checking privacy risks?
So there are two products. One is Privacy X-ray, the other is Event Horizon. I think the question is on Privacy X-ray. So we have our proprietary algorithm where we look at GDPR defined attributes of PII, quasi-identifier, statistical data as per Working Party 29. We identify attributes based on the levels of risk using that, and then we categorize into multiple. It's basically a spectrum of risk. So that's what you would see here as well, that it's a spectrum of risk for attributes. So we try to identify attributes into this spectrum of risk, and then based on that we build the model and then do privacy, simulate privacy attacks in the ecosystem and provide the risk score.
Several other questions. What is the meaning of the score that was depicted? Does a lower score just mean that re-identification is harder?
Correct. That's absolutely right. So the higher the score, the risk of re-identification is much higher.
In the demo with respect to the hospital, just Jasroop asks, when the entire data was de-identified, on what basis was the report outcome 50.6%? Only on the basis of patient ID?
So this is not the de-identified. This is for the data, which is this is, let's say this is the input. We have not de-identified the data. This is the input data with traditional de-identification method, which is tokenization, right? So this carries significant amount of risk. That is what we have identified here to be 50 for re-identification. Now, the same data can be anonymized using our Event Horizon product, where we can guarantee minimum levels of privacy protection, based on which the risk can be significantly reduced to, let's say, less than 20 or 10, based on what level of aggregation, suppression a party wants to include in privacy preservation.
4 questions from an anonymous attendee. I'll take some of them.
Sure.
Is the anonymization of data the sole privacy protecting mechanism used? What about the dangers of re-identification?
Right. So we don't just use, so anonymization, de-identification are all very broad, umbrella kind of terms, right? They are not specific terms. And that's where, some of the anonymization or de-identification methods used traditionally are vulnerable to re-identification that causes a lot of concerns. So for example, in HIPAA regulation, right, there is a method called safe harbor and another method called expert determination method. So the safe harbor method is about tokenization and masking, and you cannot even share 18 identified attributes of data with downstream parties. What we do is we meet the expert determination method requirements of US as well as GDPR's Working Party 29 anonymization requirements, where you have specific requirements of generalization, aggregation, suppression, and not singling out. So we make this available as a configurable option of what level of aggregation is required or what level of privacy preservation is required. For example, we also use differential privacy, local differential privacy. So that is applied on the data so that the data becomes much more privacy preserved for downstream collaboration. And this is in line with both global requirements like HIPAA expert determination level requirements, as well as Europe's GDPR Article 29 requirement.
How do you make the data subject aware or get consent when the data is already collected without consent?
So consent, we are not speaking about consent here, right? Consent is the responsibility of the DPO. Correct. Now, if customer says that I have not consented my personal data to be used for downstream collaboration or analytics, I don't want it, then customer cannot use the data. Now, for anonymization, this anonymization becomes non-personal data, and that may not require consent level requirement, but it is better to get consent from the customer to say that can we use anonymized data for downstream collaboration? That would be a better way of doing it, where customers may say that, okay, this is also in EU with a data strategy coming up. They are allowing customers to say, to be generous to allow data for anonymous data to be used for public good and other purposes. So this is built at that level. So businesses which want to do it the right way, they can also ask for a consent saying that if you can allow anonymous data to be used for these purposes, that would build a lot of trust with the customer, at the same time unlock data for value creation downstream.
What are the factors you take into account for rating the privacy risk scale?
Sorry, what are the
factors that you take into account for rating the privacy risk scale?
Sure. So a lot of things are proprietary, but what I can disclose at this point is that we simulate multiple attacks. As you first see, we do this classification of attributes, which is sort of cutting edge today, because majority of the deployments understand just the PII part, try to identify if PII is present in the data or not. We go much beyond, because the regulatory requirement does not stop with personally identifiable information. Even if it is not PII, but it is a direct or indirect identifier, it is called as personal information. So we try to capture the risk present in the indirect identifiers as well. And then based on that, we provide a holistic risk score. We also simulate bunch of privacy attacks, like singling out, linkage, and bunch of attacks. And based on those reports, we build the risk score.
Do you also assist organizations in data mapping? For example, if they don't know what data they have or see, do you support them in mapping that data and then continue the data lineage?
No, we don't do discovery at this point. Probably we may do downstream, but the way we are beginning or the way we are visualizing the solution is that data is a flow where you have, as you create new applications, there will be new flows of data which will start, and at that point a DPO or a CISO, when it comes for a validation process before the data flow starts or before the application starts, right? You require a means to visualize the risk, and that is what we are providing. As Manisha was also telling earlier, it is better post rather than doing post publication or post deployment. How do you start a journey of data? How do you design an application to start with? That's when this can be very, very useful. You can use it for downstream flows as well, but we don't do discovery at this point.
Is your primary key always kept in an identifiable manner to maintain referential integrity? Partha asks.
No, we don't do. We don't do a primary key. We don't do anything, right? We look at the data and see what the risk is, right? We don't create a primary key for user or try to uniquely identify people. Nothing like that. This data set is just an example. If it is a primary key based data, then what is the risk? If the data does not have any primary key, then what is the risk? If the data is anonymized, what is the quality of anonymization and what is the risk? So we cater to all kinds of data. Probably there are a couple of other things as well. So the scores can be, I'm just trying to hide this.
There is one last question about whether you can show the data after it is processed by Event Horizon.
Sorry, just the previous question. So this is for an anonymous data. So it's not just for a data with a primary key. It can be for anonymous data where it is generalized or aggregated, in which case the score will be much lesser. Sorry, there was the question.
The last question is, can you show the data after it is processed by Event Horizon?
Sure, good question. So, for example, this is a sample data. So you can see whatever the business defines as a level of risk and what can be allowed for downstream processing. The data would be aggregated using different methods. And then you can see that the quasi-identifiers are aggregated to a specific level. Sensitive data are aggregated in a way that the distribution is similar to the global distribution, and other attributes we can apply different kinds of protection, like local differential privacy, and then the privacy of the whole data set is protected.
Last question, and this one's funny. Is there a zero score?
No, it's a very, very interesting question. There is any information shared, there is no zero score. When information goes out, there is always a risk. It can be very, very minimal.
This was great. Abhilash, thank you so much for your time. Aarti?
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Abhilash. And if anyone here is interested in understanding the considerations that CPOs or CISOs make, we actually had a roundtable with them on day 2. So you can find that on our YouTube channel as well. Up next, we have Manav Mahajan, who's the founder CEO of Dissecto, and he will be presenting now on the product that they offer for privacy preserving ad tech.
Thank you, Aarti. Thank you, Nikhil, and the whole MediaNama team for organizing this workshop. So I'll not take much of the time since most of the panelists have covered up the problem statement. I'll jump mostly to the solution which Dissecto is offering. I'll be sharing my screen. Is it visible?
Yes, yes. Manav can't hear you.
I'm sorry, like, am I audible now? Am I audible now?
Yes, you are. You are.
All right. Sorry about that. So at Dissector, we build solutions for secure data sharing and analytics. We are bringing a paradigm shift in data security through privacy enhancing technologies. The existing solutions in terms of data security help in securing the data in the storage or even during the transition. But the privacy enhancing technologies enable data security even when the data is under computation. So the problem statement has been discussed in detail by the other panelists. We also deal in the similar space, problems related to data security risk, complex regulations, and trust building. Uh, Dissecto offers solutions for the complete data privacy cycle. We provide solutions right from the policy like consent management to data discovery and classification to data remediation and even data sharing and analytics. So these solutions are offered through our two product offerings. One is called Ekant and the other one is Incog. Ekant is a decentralized, privacy-preserving data analytics framework. So what Ekant allows is, like, it allows mutually distrusting parties. These parties can be different organizations or individuals in the same organizations at different hierarchical levels to confidentially collaborate on data analysis. In order to enable Ekant, we use privacy enhancing technologies such as homomorphic encryption. Homomorphic encryption allows the data analysts to perform aggregations on the encrypted data without ever decrypting the data. Similarly, zero knowledge proofs are also utilized in Ekant to enable verifiability of the computations performed during the homomorphic encryption phase or the data sharing phase. The product which we will be focusing for this demo, like I'll be showcasing a small use case as well, is called Incog. It's an end-to-end privacy management platform. It allows organizations to classify and discover the data. The data classification can happen on both structured as well as unstructured data sources. The sources can be local or cloud-based, such as your Google Drive, email, AWS. After the data is classified, it helps to correlate the data to the data subject. The data subject are mostly in the organizational purview, like they can be the customers, their employees. After the classification and correlation steps are done, it helps to anonymize the data. We use mathematically formalized anonymization techniques and provide proofs of anonymity through k-anonymity and L-diversity. We also have a patented tech in which we utilize homomorphic encryption along with cryptographic shredding as an alternate to anonymization. So what this does, it helps the organizations to cater to data subject access requests and data deletion requests in an accelerated manner. So without Incog, the data is mostly unstructured. The organizations don't know where the data, sensitive data is residing. And with the help of Incog, we have labeled organized data. We restrict the access to sensitive data to the relevant stakeholders. And it also has the ability to redact redundant sensitive data. So I'll show you a brief demo of a small utility which we had built for the public purview. So this allows the user to upload a small folder, and it helps identify certain PII types or entities. These entities are mostly in the domain of finance, national, in the Indian context, like Aadhaar card, PAN card, voter ID, your passwords, medical related data. It has different it supports different file formats, docx, xls, images, PDFs. And once the scanning is done, it attaches PII entities to the files which have those PII entities found in them. So we use a couple of artificial intelligence techniques, OCR, and named entity recognition. Here's an example of an Excel file, which is in which this tool is able to identify gender, medical condition, the email, and the sexual orientation. This is just for the sake of demo. This tool can detect data in like the real world industrial standards. It is also able to identify Aadhaar and other documents. So yeah, that's about it. Like, we'll be releasing this product for the public purview, and if you want earlier access, you can drop me an email and I'll be happy to share access. I'll be open to any feedback or questions you have.
So there's a question from an anonymous entity about whether the system structures unstructured data. How does the system structure the unstructured data?
So we pass through different unstructured data formats, and we identify certain classifiers, and we have our own format where we structure the unstructured data into SQL-based databases.
Does it cover paper-based data? I would suppose not.
Paper-based data, like if you have images of paper-based data, we have like good accuracy over handwritten documents as well, but we'll prefer like if it's typed out documents, the accuracy is 80 to 90% if we have images of paper-based data. If that was the question.
Ati, do you have any questions, or does anyone else have any more questions?
Hi, no, I have nothing right now.
Anyone else?
An anonymous attendee is asking about the kind of remediation that you do at Dissector.
So we offer different remediations. We offer encryption, like homomorphic encryption, and even the regular encryption techniques as sort of remediation. We offer deletion. We offer different anonymization techniques. So depending upon the type of data and the use case which an organization has, we offer an array of remediation technologies.
I guess that's all we have. Manav, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Thanks. We'll now move on to the last session, something that we've all been waiting for. It's our privilege to have Martin Thompson, distinguished engineer at Mozilla, here to talk to us about privacy-preserving advertising. As I mentioned when we began, that a large part of the privacy mess that we have today is a function of advertisers trying to waste less money. And towards that end, they profile, they target, they try and determine intent. There are thousands of data points, tens of thousands of data points that have been collected on each of us, often without a clear purpose in mind, except for the directing of advertising. And as we know very well in India, there's data that's leaked, that's sold, that's shared without consent. There is data that, I received emails trying to sell me, and probably other random people, databases with of students who've just given a particular exam. So there are security challenges and there are privacy challenges, and a large part of it is a function of supply and demand. Because there is a demand for this data, the supply gets created, and there is a global market failure in privacy, and which is why at some level we need regulation to clamp down on bad behavior, because we are getting impacted personally. Democracies are getting impacted as a function of citizens getting targeted. And the other move that started taking place is with technology changing in order to preserve privacy. So we had 3 demos of that push towards improving data segmentation, collection, usage, sharing, and from a consumer perspective, empowering them towards not sharing data. I'd like to invite Martin to take it from here and tell us what's happening in the world of digital advertising now. Martin.
Thanks, Nikhil. If you don't mind, I'm just going to start a presentation. It's I've got a lot of slides. I might go through some of the background a little more quickly than otherwise, but let's see if I can get this working for everyone. How's that working?
Yep, we can see that. Thanks.
Excellent. All right, so start with a little bit about me. I'm an engineer, so this talk is going to be about the technical side of this problem. Obviously, there's a lot of things going on in this space that will be regulatory focused. I have some familiarity with the regulations here, but regulations are different in every country. And thankfully, the technical side of things is not. My background's in web standards and working with people across the industry on delivering these things. And I've recently started looking at ads. Just to express my bias again, technical focus. I also have a particular focus on the web. Advertising encompasses a lot more than just the web advertising. Some of the things that we're talking about will touch a little bit on different platforms, but primarily we're talking about the way that the web and websites in general use advertising. That's not to say that these are not trends that are larger than the web. So just keep that in mind as we go through.
Just in terms of operations, Martin, would you be open to taking questions while you're going through the presentation, or do you want to do them at the end?
So I was about to get to that. So I've got an agenda here that goes through a number of things. I've got breaks set aside for Q&A. I think it's probably best if I go through. There's quite a lot of material to get through here. But I've set aside, I think, 4 or 5 breaks throughout the proceedings, natural breaks in the flow that we'll take a few questions then.
Thanks.
And I can see if people are asking questions, so maybe I'll look at them occasionally. So to start with, I'll give a brief background on online advertising, how we got to the point that we're in, how some of these problems that Nikhil was talking about earlier manifest, and in particular some of the worst privacy problems that we're seeing. Then I'll take a look at the way in which privacy preserving technology is being applied to this space and some of the proposals that are in this area. I'll spend a lot of time here on the measurement one. I think Nikhil raised the anecdote. I'm spending all this money on advertising and half of it's wasted. I just don't know which half. I think measurement is probably the most interesting and most promising aspect of what's happening here. But then we'll talk about targeting and optimization, and we might talk about some other technologies that are related to this. And then at the end, I'll make some observations on trends and where I see the industry moving as a whole. This is the speculation piece. This is the part that we honestly have no idea what's going on and what might happen in the future, but we can sort of observe what's happening and try to extrapolate from there. So, background. So the most important fact, I think, that sort of is background for a lot of this work is the fact that advertising works. How? Well, functionally, you show some ads to some people, and some of those people will behave differently as a result. There's lots of ways you can explain this and lots of science involved. A lot of people spend their entire lives trying to work out exactly how this happens and trying to tune it. But for the purposes of this talk, it's just enough to realize that this is how it works. And advertising is at some level cost effective for people to spend money on. In practice, what we find is that publishers will develop some content that people want to view and visit. So maybe there's some online articles or videos or what have you. And people will visit that publisher to view that content. The publisher then sells space alongside that content or interspersed with that content to advertisers. And advertisers then spend the money in order to access the audience that's looking at that content. And even just at that simple level, this can be crudely effective. Sites, obviously, with more visitors can get more money for their advertising because they're putting their ads in front of more people. Obviously, when you show the ads to more people, they're more likely to be effective in finding that set of people who are likely to change their behavior as a result. People are going to buy your products are a subset of those that you're showing the ads to, but your advertising doesn't work if you don't show it to a lot more people than that. So there's lots of ads in the system that are being paid for that have no effect, and this sort of leads to the primary problem that advertisers deal with in general. They're looking to balance the scales. They want to take the amount of money that they're spending on advertising and minimize that as much as possible, and get the maximum return on that investment. The extra money that they're earning as a result of showing that advertising needs to exceed the money that they spend on performing that. And the entire industry is driven by this motivation right here. This is the crux of a lot of the innovations in this space. So sort of ask, how can you make ads more efficient? I think some of these questions have already been sort of foreshadowed. Well, the first thing you can potentially do is just make the ads a lot cheaper. So spend less money on the ads and maybe you can get the same effect. The thing is, online advertising is pretty cheap, and reducing the cost only goes so far until there's no money. And of course, this has adverse effects on publishers who rely on that revenue for supporting their business and providing the content. So that only goes so far. What the industry has realized over time is that targeting is kind of key to all of this. Better than showing ads to lots and lots of people is only showing those ads to the people who might change their behavior as a result. Some of the terms that are used here are particularly volatile, but the word susceptible is used particularly in political advertising, where you identify people who might be receptive to your message, and they're considered susceptible to advertising. And ideally, what you want to do is you only want to show your ads and pay for those ads when there is a person on the other end who's receptive to the message and might change their behavior as a result. Ideally, you only show it to someone who will change their behavior as a result, but obviously this is a numbers game, so that doesn't always work. So the first thing you do when you try to build a system like this from an engineering perspective is you build a feedback loop. You have a bunch of ad inventory. There's a selection mechanism that decides which ads you're going to place in any given point, and then use a measurement system to provide information about how those placements worked and feed that back into the ad selection mechanism. This is something that's been done with online advertising since the early 2000s. And we'll get into more about the details of how this works as we go through. The most fundamental and important aspect of measurement is attribution. And attribution says that when I've shown an ad in one context to one person, that's this one on the left, and that person in some other context then subsequently takes the desired action, so maybe they buy the product, then maybe that ad was responsible for that sale, and we can attribute the sale to the showing of the ad in the previous context. This is often how advertising is measured directly. There are other ways you can measure advertising, but this is the sort of primary use case that we use. And the actions might be a number of things. It might be purchasing a product, it might be visiting a website, it might be signing up for a newsletter. It could be any business outcome that the advertiser wishes to drive through the use of the advertising. So this is where we get into tracking. So the easiest way to perform attribution is to observe everything that a person does on the internet across every website and just log everything that they do. We give that person a unique identifier, and we create a log that says this person at this time visited this website and clicked on this button. This person visited this other website and this other website and this other website. And you essentially create a detailed log of every single action that they took across all of the websites on the internet. And then later, when you want to do something like attribution, you can go through that log and look for the interesting events and tie them together and say, oh, in this case here, the user was shown an ad and later they bought the product. We can probably count that as an attribution. This practice of tracking is, of course, one of the primary privacy problems that we have today. So that's not exactly ideal. The other aspect of this system is you want to tune the process for delivering the ads. And so the industry has sort of settled on a market-based system where a publisher puts out a piece of ad inventory that is an opportunity to show an ad, and they throw that out into ad networks or supply-side platforms, and they contact some demand-side platforms who are backed by agencies and advertisers and whatnot. And there's essentially an auction process that is run for this one ad placement. And everyone puts their bids out, and the winner that's willing to pay the most money gets to show their ad in that slot. And we can look at the system as a market-based economy for the placement of ads. And the idea is that with a market-based economy, the people who are participating in this economy have an incentive to spend as little money on their placements as possible, but still gain the value from it. And the value of the bids will be reflective of the value that they see in placing ads with that particular inventory. Of course, now that we know how the outcomes worked and we have a market-based system in order to drive this, we need more information. So we need information on the sorts of ads, what sites, and the users that are involved. And so this leads us to gathering more and more information about people that are involved here. And so you can imagine that just a small slice of this market looks like this. The publisher has a piece of ad inventory that they want to sell, and they provide some information about the context, what the article's about, their information about their website, information that they have learned about the user that's visiting their website. And they pass that information along to their supply-side platform that is able to use that information. Maybe they can connect that information up with information that they have in their data management platform or that they know themselves, and can augment that with more information. This makes the ad inventory more appealing to people who are likely to bid on it, because then they can make more informed decisions about how to bid and what price to set. And of course, that goes through to the DSP, which might then consult its own data management platform and augment that information even further. And so what you see is just a small slice of that overall market. This information is effectively being broadcast across the entire network of ad techs and advertisers. And the result here is actually much more complicated than I showed here, because there are pairwise agreements about what data can be shared with whom and all those sorts of other things. But you'll notice that in none of this we talk about the user interest in a lot of these. The privacy interest ends at the point that the information is being exchanged, and consent just becomes an inconvenience in some ways for operating a system like this. But of course, in practice, the consent management platforms are all tightly integrated into this entire ecosystem, which further complicates the system far more than I could show on a slide like this. So once we have tracking, we have attribution. We are able to feed more information into the system based on knowledge about users and the context in which ads are being placed. And you can start to optimize this system much better. And of course, more information, better optimization. What we find is that the information here is so large that machine learning is practically the only way to manage the volume of information. And so machine learning is used at every layer of this system in terms of managing bids, tuning the ways in which publishers deliver their content, and bidding strategies and various other things as well. One of the great things with ML is it's proved very, very good at optimizing for particular outcomes. So if you're measuring for conversions, your ads are turning into purchases, for instance, then you can tell the ML, this is exactly what I would like you to seek. And it can take the low quality information that's coming through the system. There's a lot of information, a lot of it's very low quality, and sort of the ML system can sort through all of that stuff and produce strategies and processes that deliver the outcomes that you're looking for. So what we end up with in sort of at a high level is the ad selection logic uses a number of different categories of information. So there's information about the site, there's contextual information, there's demographic information, which is information about the person. And then there's also sort of behavioral targeting, which is the classification that I used to sort of describe things that person has done in the past, whether that be the recent past or long distant past. And then that turns into ad placements. And on the return loop, we have some fraud prevention pieces that filters out bad behavior and attribution. And then we also have some other measurement pieces, reach and frequency, which I won't talk about to any great extent, but there is work going on in this area as well. Reach and frequency is primarily about ensuring that your advertisements reach the requisite number of people at the requisite rate. So you're showing it to a large number of people the appropriate number of times, not too few times, not too many times. So that was a bit of a whirlwind tour. Is there any questions so far?
I have one. You spoke about the rise of, you spoke about supply side platforms and demand side platforms. Would you agree that a large part of the problem actually lies with this move towards demand side platforms, which began somewhere around 2010 in response to Facebook essentially becoming a demand side player, as opposed to, which deeply profiled people on the basis of their identities. So there's a problem of tracking and profiling largely lie with the demand side, because on the supply side, there's only if you're logged in that you are generally able to profile a user.
So I think the problem exists systemically. So whether this be the division of supply side platforms and demand side platforms, or the sort of predecessors with the generic ad networks, all of which exist to varying degrees, the dependence on personal information, and particularly behavioral and profile information, is sort of the key problem here. The fact that we're using supply side platforms and demand side platforms is really an evolution of the way in which advertisers and publishers as a whole have have tried to ensure that the entities representing them best represent their interests. And so that split, I think, was to some extent inevitable when you look at it from that perspective, because they do to some extent have competing interests in this market. But one of the things that I think we've seen as a general trend alongside this collection of information is a sort of concentration of power in these intermediaries, because they control a lot of the information that's being exchanged here. And I think that's a lot of where the problem starts, is that the trade in information and the gathering of that information becomes its own value in and of itself. And we talk about secondary markets for the information. So it's not just we're using the information for advertising, we're using the information for informing other choices of our business strategy, or we're selling it to data brokers for other purposes that they can then on-sell to other customers, so market researchers and various other things. So that's, I think, where the main problem occurs, is that the existence of the market in personal information.
There's a question from an anonymous attendee: with multiple A/B testing possible and the uses of pixels, beacons, heat maps, etc., there is too much intrusiveness creeping up in such profiling. How do you explain this from a sound ethical perspective?
So I don't consider these unnecessarily an ethical practice when we talk about these things. So we can talk probably at length about the interactions with consent and dark patterns and various other things, or what we like to call deceptive design practices. But I think probably the challenge here is in managing the information that comes into these systems without resorting to all of these tracking pixels and beacons and the detailed logging of information on people, and looking at what it is that people need to collect. And maybe we can come back to this as we get through to the end, because I've got a number of points toward the end of the talk about this one.
One perhaps stupid question, but how effective is cleaning your cookies in terms of preventing tracking, and how some of the traditional mechanisms to like, we don't have, for example, dynamic identifiers on platforms, or platforms won't necessarily allow you to start over. What are the recommended old mechanisms, and how effective are they anymore? Because I'm assuming as users try to use some of those mechanisms to try and protect themselves from profiling, I guess those who need to profile them would have innovated in order to make that activity redundant. Where do we stand on this?
Yeah, so I'll get to this toward the end of the talk, but there's a lot of activity that's going on here, and some of this will be technical controls that will try to limit the ability of people to do tracking, and ultimately those technical mechanisms are at odds to some extent with usability and just making the web continue to function. And so there's a lot of ways in which the people who are interested in doing tracking can try to circumvent the protections that for instance, browsers are implementing. And so there will continue to be evolution in this space. I think I can probably come back to this topic when we get close to the end of the talk. So I'm going to talk about some of the privacy preserving things now. All right. So it probably behooves us to talk a little bit about what the shape of the problem is here. So tracking is bad. I'm not going to put too fine a point on it. Tracking is very much the collection of private information, and advertising does to a very large extent depend on being able to collect this information. And unfortunately, tracking and the trade in the information that generates is bad for individual privacy and autonomy, and we've talked about a number of the effects that this has had on democracies and in individual autonomy. It's not great. So what we're seeing is platforms, browsers in particular, are actively working to try and prevent tracking. From a technical standpoint, we're also working with regulators at various levels to try to discourage the practice. So a lot of people will focus on cookies here, and cookies are a very easy scapegoat. But when we talk about technical restrictions on tracking, we're talking about taking that a little bit beyond cookies and looking at all aspects of tracking and the violation of privacy that results from that. We'll talk more about this as we go through. So this is a bit of a sidebar here, but I thought it was worth mentioning this. One of the problems that a number of people see in this business is this sort of value redistribution that happens as a result of having these stores of information about users. So imagine you have a website that has good, strong relationships with its visitors. It has a loyal customer base. They visit regularly. The website has built up a lot of knowledge about these visitors and has good relationships with them. It engages in advertising through various intermediaries and puts its ad placements out with some of the information that it's learned about its users alongside those ads to make those ads more appealing to others. It's possible that the intermediaries in these situations negotiate agreements whereby the information that they're given in these contexts can then be stored by them and reused in other contexts. And then when another website, which maybe has none of the good relationships with its visitors, asks to make an ad placement, the ad tech is in a position then to use the information that it's gained from the good website to make the advertising placements better for this other website. And so now the value that's being generated by the first website is now being used to benefit the other website in terms of getting better ad placement or better ad revenue as a result. This is something that concerns publishers in particular. They spend a lot of time building their relationships with the users, and they see low quality websites as essentially riding off the back of that work. And this is a concern that's shared by a number of people in the industry. And so when we talk about the way in which the end of tracking or tracking mitigations is having an effect on the industry, there's an ongoing debate about whether there's a desire to retain the existing properties of the system and to what extent the technical mechanisms that we put in place to do privacy preserving advertising need to be able to replicate the properties of an existing system. And this is one of the properties that perhaps we aren't necessarily looking to replicate as we move forward. This is obviously something that is somewhat contentious in the area, but it's something to keep in mind as we go through some of these things. So tracking is bad. What is good? So there's a lot of debate on this one. I talked a little bit about this particular value transfer thing that was happening, but there are a range of views that are being held by people in the industry, and all views on the spectrum are contributing to a debate. So we have one view that says that advertising is just unconditionally damaging, but this would sort of deny the benefits that advertising provides and its support of content, and particularly the access to that content, particularly by people who cannot afford to, would not be able to afford necessarily to pay for that content themselves on their own merits. Another view says that to the greatest extent possible, we need to preserve the properties of the current system, ignoring, of course, all the harm caused by the trade in personal information that goes on. And so there's a number of attempts to sort of find a middle path between the two of these ones. But even there's a number of debates that go on, and we'll touch on some of those things as we go through here. One thing that is fairly clearly understood from, I think, the bulk of the industry is that contextual integrity is one of the key concepts that we want to preserve. And this is the idea that what you do on one website is private between you and that website. And what you do on other websites is immaterial to that. And so when you're on a particular website, what you do there does not leak out so that other websites can learn about what you've done there. So if you're looking at a website for reproductive health, you probably don't want the website that's operated by your local pizza delivery place to know that you've visited this other website. And to the extent possible, this ideal is something that cookies has routinely violated, and tracking generally undermines. And this is the sort of goal. This is one of the goals that we're working toward. Same person, different sites, can't be identified as the same person. This is the re-identification thing that was mentioned earlier. This is the basic idea that we're seeing formalized in a lot of cases, because when you visit one website, your history of activity on that website can be retained by that website, modulo clearing cookies, of course. Any action that you take on that website can be linked to all the actions that have happened on another website if they're able to link that activity to the same person. So the idea is to ensure that there is no linkage that happens between visits to the same website. Cookies obviously violate this. If you have support for third-party cookies, which is not something that's supported in a large number of browsers currently, a third party can embed content on multiple websites. And the cookie that they set when they embed that content will be returned to them when the browser renders the other site. And that third party can now learn the behavior for that same person as they cross different websites. And they can also use that information to help the websites connect the two visits together. So anything that one website learns about your activity can then be passed along using this linkage to other websites. This is not correct. There's also many other forms of ways in which the web breaks this notion of contextual identity. So if you navigate between websites, the link that you follow can pass information between the websites that might be used to identify you. Turns out that the browsers are complex machines, and they exhibit certain characteristics that sometimes can be used to re-identify people. So the obvious one here is your IP address is something that is usually pretty close to uniquely identifying, but there are also characteristics of your machine, like the size of the screen, whether or not you have a webcam, various things about the drivers on your system and fonts installed, and all sorts of other properties can be used to sort of form a fingerprint of your browsing history and link you up across websites. And then, of course, websites can ask you for information that might be unique to you that would connect you between websites. And this is one of the areas in which, even if you do clear cookies, all of the information can come rolling back in again. If you give websites your email address, if you have the same email address on two different websites, that's going to be a pretty clear indicator that it's the same person. Same for phone numbers, credit cards, the delivery addresses that you use for online shopping, and all sorts of other information that you might share, like your name, or even things like reusing passwords are a poor idea in these contexts. It may actually be the case that it's impossible to perfectly maintain contextual integrity. I know that friends who work on the Tor browser may be sad to hear this, but this is a very challenging problem. One of the problems that we deal with here is that as we start to look for ways to reduce the ability for websites to link identities, we find new ways in which that can be exploited and new ways in which the protections make websites stop working properly. And so there's a lot of work that goes on here, that very careful work to try to limit the ways in which tracking can occur. So the other thing to probably address here is that, let's say we turn off third-party cookies at some point. Some browsers already have. Most browsers already have, in fact. There's not a bright line in the sand that says, before this date, tracking can be used to build profiles on site visitors and link identities across websites. And then suddenly you turn the cookies off and tracking is no longer possible. In practice, the user profiles that websites have managed to build up that is connected across multiple websites will still be valid the day after, will still be valid the day after that. What will happen here is that the options, the technical options available to people who are engaging in tracking will start to reduce. And third-party cookie disabling is a major milestone in that, and it does to some extent reduce the ability of websites to do this linkage, but the information that they have already gathered is still valuable. We're not going to be clearing cookies for people. The existing profiles that you have on websites won't magically disappear at that date. And so it's important to realize that this is an ongoing journey, and perhaps in a few years' time, the people who use the web will find themselves in a better position than us, who had to deal with the dark ages, as it were. So probably a good point to pause for questions. I don't see any on the Q&A. Brief pause.
This is all about probability, right? In terms of trying to uniquely identify attributes and behavior of people. But at the end of the day, this is all probabilistic. So are you saying that through the mechanisms available, like, for example, third-party cookies, that's a pushback against probabilistic determination of what your behavior has been, and sort of creating a gap in tracking?
Yeah, so a lot of the techniques that we're talking about beyond cookies. So cookies are fairly deterministic in the sense that if I give you a cookie, you're going to give me that cookie back, and I can make that cookie unique to you. They're quite deterministic, and despite all of the sort of error problems that people have, they're quite reliable for tracking purposes. When we talk about some of these other approaches, yes, we do start to get into probabilistic methods of re-identification, and then it becomes a little bit more challenging for people who are looking to engage in tracking.
I'm just wondering about whether there is a mechanism to sort of, and maybe you'll probably get to this later, but is there a mechanism to disrupt all of this by introducing junk data in the mix?
Yes and no. I believe that Brave has pioneered some junk data in terms of trying to deal with the fingerprinting issue. But here we're talking about an escalation path rather than anything definitive, because once it is known that you're injecting junk information, the people looking to engage in tracking can apply statistical corrections and maximum likelihood estimators and all sorts of other techniques to sort of reduce the noise that's being introduced as a result of the protections. So the general attitude that we have towards this is that this will, at least for the next few years, continue to be an escalating war, if you will, between people looking to use more advanced tracking techniques, and then the protections will need to be delivered in line with those techniques, and each one will make advances in response to the other.
And it's the same with surveillance, right? You keep trying to find ways of protecting yourself and preventing. This is effectively you're countering surveillance in a different shape.
This is surveillance, yes. Yeah.
So there is a question that I'd asked earlier about starting over, right? Are there so is there no mechanism to basically start over, just clear your history completely with any of these platforms? Because to use a phrase I'd used earlier, the data about you has been collected at planet scale, and so the only way to sort of try and de-link it, there is no way to de-link it in a sense, right?
Yeah, so the real challenge here for someone who's looking to make that clean break is ensuring that there's nothing in their previous activity that can be connected to their new activity. So you buy a new computer, you get a new browser, you don't retain any of your cookies. Maybe you need to switch to a new ISP so that your IP address is different. There's a bunch of steps that you might want to take depending on how I guess paranoid you are about someone being able to link this identity. But you don't get to benefit from your existing email accounts, for instance, in that sort of world potentially. You don't get to use the existing information that you've stored online. So maybe you've used a cloud service provider and they're storing your photos. You don't get to benefit from those services as a result. And for a lot of people, this is simply not an option that you can take. There are certain people who are in certain high-risk occupations. I'm thinking here, journalists and the like, who might be in a position where they feel that these extraordinary steps are necessary. But for ordinary people, this is not really a viable approach to take. You can certainly take some moderate hygiene steps, and clearing cookies is one of the things that people routinely do. We have a lot of users at Firefox who routinely do this. But that only protects you against very casual sort of tracking, the likes of which we sort of see or have seen in the past. But as tracking techniques get more and more sophisticated, the ability of an advertiser to connect activity before the cookie clear and after the cookie clear becomes that much more effective. And so those techniques diminish in value. It's a pretty challenging situation to be in.
And which leads me to ask you about why you believe that a technical solution might supersede a legal solution.
No one's making that claim at all.
Okay.
I think probably the most important thing to realize here is that my focus is technical. That's my background. That's my expertise. But we have to recognize that there is two prongs to this approach. There's a technical side, and then there's a regulatory policy side, and both of them are going to need to work in tandem to provide the sorts of protections that people really need.
So there's a question from an anonymous attendee. At the policy level, cookie policies do not work. They're all legal jargons. How has the cookie banner debate progressed thus far in Europe?
Yeah, I don't want to get too much into this particular question. The way in which Europe has managed consent and the way in which the industry has responded with cookie consent banners and the like, I think has not done our users any favors, and frankly has made the experience of the web much worse as a result. And so we're looking at ways in which we can improve that situation. Some of that will be work with regulators, I think, more than it is with the technical side of things.
Can legitimate interest be used as a legal basis to drop cookies? To what extent does this conflict with the e-privacy directive, since consent is never freely given?
I'm not really in a position to answer that. That's probably a good question for a lawyer, I think.
So we'll hold that for both.
Yes, he probably has some opinions on that one.
Okay, I guess that's what we have in terms of questions so far.
Okay, great. So I'm going to do a little bit of a survey of the privacy-preserving advertising approaches that have been proposed. There's a lot going on in this space. There's no way that I can cover all of these things, but I want to give you a bit of a flavor for things.
There is
There's,
one question that's just jumped in, that's just coming right at the end. You mentioned a number of tracking mechanisms, cookies, IP addresses, fingerprinting, credit cards. To what extent are each of these used in practice? Is there some sort of a mechanism for understanding what is used more for tracking and what is used less, or is it all a mix?
So my understanding is that all of these things are used fairly extensively in tracking, to different extents by different entities. So I can't really say definitively this is the one. But if you look at each one of these things, I have experience of examples of people using these for tracking purposes. So all of the things I mentioned are being used actively for tracking. Yeah, scary, I know.
Great, I think we can move on.
Yeah. So when we talk about approaches here, probably the sort of big effort that everyone talks about here is Google's Privacy Sandbox initiative. So you'll often see this one sort of summarized as Google Chrome Privacy Sandbox, GCPS, in various terminology. So if you see that this is what we're talking about. This is a broad effort initiated by Google, and their goal is to largely maintain the existing business practices of advertisers in approximately their current form, but trying to take that contextual integrity idea that I talked about and enshrine that in the systems and provide largely technical mechanisms for protecting contextual integrity, while also providing advertisers with the information that they need to drive the sorts of business practices that they've become accustomed to doing. And here we're talking about the entire market, from the publisher side all the way down to the advertiser side. All the systems that currently exist, Google is trying to retain to some extent, maybe with small changes to the way the business practices work, but essentially the types of business practices they're looking to preserve. So going back to the picture that I had before, there's a number of different proposals in this space. There's actually quite a number more than I put on this slide because it's a massive effort that's covering a number of different disciplines. But probably the most interesting pieces here, the attribution piece. I'll talk about that fairly extensively. That's something that Google has a number of proposals around. I think they have something like 3 or 4 different proposals in this space. I'll talk about a subset of those. And then the targeting pieces are probably most interesting here. Generally speaking, they consider the contextual thing to be solved or not needing special attention. But when it comes to demographic targeting, which is targeting based on the characteristics of the person viewing the page, they have some proposals that have come out, originally Flock and now Topics. And then on the behavioral side, when we're talking about actions that you've taken in the past and using those actions to drive the selection of ads in the future, they have currently, it was originally Turtle Dove, but now it's called Fledge. And then we'll sort of see that the Privacy Sandbox also includes some fraud prevention mechanisms. Part of that's driven by the nature of the designs that they've chosen for other aspects of this system. They need to reinforce the fraud prevention side of things, because once you start making things more private, it also makes fraud easier. And they've done some work on reach and frequency, which I won't go into in any real detail. And there's a bunch of related technology around IP privacy, federated identity and login, and some generic mechanisms that they're looking to advance in the browsers. So first aspect of their approach is to build purpose-limited features for important use cases in advertising. And the idea is that they'll provide strong privacy protections, but still maintain the ability to execute on the existing practices. So 3 primary things here: attribution. There's a number of proposals in this space that I'll go over. The demographic targeting space is covered by Topics. Now, you'll note here that demographic targeting doesn't cover a number of properties that advertisers routinely use today. Things like income level, gender, age, and other things are not included in the proposals here. So there's no general way to get that information through these APIs. What they're looking at here is interest-based targeting, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later. And then finally, the behavioral targeting thing, which I'll get to toward the end. The other half of the privacy sandbox thing is looking at ways to improve the protections for the personal information that was previously being tracked. And so this is improvements on contextual integrity, and probably the most obvious thing that they're doing here is removing the third-party cookies that you're seeing being announced and moved back and all sorts of other things like that. And they're also looking at using various techniques to improve IP address privacy, looking to provide pseudonymity services for things like email and phone numbers. I'm really encouraged to see that India's got a real phone number privacy system. This is something that we're also working on at Mozilla. I think it's an important sort of feature in this space. But there's a number of protections in this general area that fall into this privacy sandbox category. I won't talk about these ones as much because I think the primary focus of this is on the advertising technology side of things. So it's probably a good opportunity for me to talk a little bit about sort of how I think the privacy sandbox is behaving, and what I think of the general approach. I think probably to a large extent, the biggest critique here is that the proposals presume, to a very large extent, trying to preserve the current market. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is a significant focus on competitive effects. And we can talk some more about that as well. But because they're trying to preserve those the competitive landscape as it stands today, there's very little willingness to change some of the fundamental aspects of the way in which advertising operates. And they're trying, to a very large extent, to preserve as much of the existing revenue for all actors involved. And that sort of leads to some interesting biases in the way that the system operates. There's also, there is no attempt to preserve or try to deal with the trade in private information. And so what we might see if tracking becomes less effective as a result of the protections that they're putting in place is that there could be a reduction in the efficiency of the markets that deal primarily in trading private information. Another thing to remember here is that because Google is so big and they dominate so many aspects of the market and adjacent markets, a lot of these proposals are seen by many people as the natural outcome of any process that happens here. We don't necessarily see that. We sort of believe that the standardization process and multi-stakeholder process is very important. And we think that the opinions of other actors in the ecosystem are just as important, if not sometimes more important than Google's positions. So we want to make it very clear that there's no necessarily, it's not necessarily the case that just because Google comes out with something that it is the right answer or it is a good answer. And that might not change the fact that because they have a vast amount of market power in their case, it still might be the answer that we end up with. And so that's something that we need to be cognizant of as we work through these things. So I will concentrate a little bit on Google's proposals, but I will talk a little bit about some of the other proposals as we get through. So probably the bulk of this, I think, is going to focus on one of the areas in which I think there is a significant interest in making an advancement, and that is measuring advertising. This would be the attribution problem. So as we talked about before, the idea is to attribute conversions to the advertising that preceded them. So you show an ad to someone, if that results in an action, then that is a conversion. Now, it might be that someone just viewed an ad or they clicked on an ad. Who knows? Doesn't really matter at this point. And it also doesn't really matter what the action is at the other end of this. It might be that they're buying a product as a result, but the whole purpose of attribution is to look at the business goals that are being driven by advertising and measure the effect on those business goals to the extent that they can be measured from advertising. And so there's a lot of ways in which this can happen. Sort of very typical questions that people want to ask when it comes to attribution is, how many of the conversions that I'm seeing can be attributed to the advertising? And then how many of these conversions can be attributed to which of the different publishers that I'm working with, or the different campaigns that I'm running, or the different creatives that I'm showing, all of the different aspects of the business that goes into this. We want to know how it's performing. And the challenge here is that we need to link two distinct events for the same person across contexts. And so naturally, we're talking about breaking contextual integrity. We'll talk about how we deal with this problem as we go through. So attribution is used for a number of different purposes. There's the sort of general accounting things, which gives you an idea of how your advertising is performing. It might determine who gets paid for the results that the advertising is driving. So there may be some incentive-based payment models. It's not how a lot of the industry works, but it is a possibility here. And there's lots of different models that can be used to drive attribution. And we can talk at length about different attribution models, but fact is there's a lot of complexity in the system, and that is reflected at every single layer. Probably one of the most important things that attribution is used for is tuning the system for the delivery of ads. So if you're looking to target particular demographics or particular markets with your advertising, attribution gives you information about what targeting is working, what demographics or groups or websites are delivering you the most value, and gives the ability to shift what money you're spending on advertising to sort of meet the needs of your business. Now, there's a lot of contextual information currently used, and also lots of information about individuals that come from the profiling that's being used in tracking. A lot of that is then fed into machine learning algorithms that then tune the bidding process or the choice of creatives or various other things that go into the system. This requires lots and lots of information. And what we'll see when we get further through this is that the privacy preserving systems tend to degrade the quality and the granularity of the information that these systems get, which can make it quite challenging for doing optimization. So the contextual integrity problem here is pretty simple. You have ads shown on one website that are expected to drive outcomes on another website. And attribution requires that you connect the action on one website, the ad on one website, with the outcome on another website, which completely breaks contextual integrity. And if you look in the example, site A knows that this person is user 123. Site B knows that this is user 456. And in an ideal world, those two identities can't be connected to the same person by those websites. But in order to perform attribution, we want to know that these two events did, in fact, happen to the same person or by the same person. And so we have a very challenging problem for us, because we have a need to connect the information, but we also have a need to keep the information unconnected for privacy reasons. So the old way of doing this, as I mentioned before, is to just log everything, look at the logs, work out what happened as a result of looking at the logs. It's very simple. It's very flexible. We can answer a lot of questions with this one. It's quite powerful. It requires a lot of storage, but storage is cheap. So that's not a problem. It also happens to be the case that those logs tend to be value that you can sell on to other people, which is terrible for privacy overall. The new way that we're talking about is building purpose-limited mechanisms to support the use case and only the use case. So the idea is to only deliver the information that's needed for attribution purposes, maybe this optimization cases, and that's it. So the first approach that we're talking about is sort of event-level reporting APIs. So Apple's PCM, or private click measurement, and Google has a proposal that's similar, but different, of course, that does event-level reporting. And so the idea is that you have the browser record events as they occur. So when the ad is shown, the site says, "Hey, browser, I showed this ad," and the browser remembers that. And then later on a different site, that other site says, "Oh, by the way, browser, this was an ad outcome. And if there was an ad that was previously shown, please generate me a report that connects those two things together." So at some point in the future, the browser will generate a report that says site A showed ad number 75, and that resulted in site B reporting outcome number 7 for the same person. This has a bunch of problems from a privacy perspective, so and also from a utility perspective. So the timing and when the reports are generated leaks information to all the people involved. So you might learn that an outcome happened at a particular point in time, and so you need some sort of anonymization system to ensure that the delivery of the report can't be connected to the outcome that happened. And so that you have to delay the reports and you have to send them through anonymizing proxies in order to do this. The number of ways in which you can identify ads or outcomes can sort of be used by the websites, if they want, to link particular page views to different people. In fact, Google's proposal has enough identifiers to provide a different millions of unique identifiers to the one person. And this is a specific design goal of theirs, but it means that from a privacy perspective, the website that's showing the ad is in a position now to, when it gets the ad, it knows specifically that the user bought the product on the other website. They might not know the exact value of the product, but they know that someone took an action. That specific person took an action. And so what you see is there's a balance between the number of identifiers that can be used by websites to identify the ads and the outcomes, and the privacy properties of the system. You provide more identifiers, the privacy gets worse, but it becomes more useful for managing the system. And you have the opposite. Apple's PCM has very few identifiers and comparatively better privacy, but it also tends to be the case that the information is useless to advertisers because the granularity of the information provided doesn't help them do any of the things that they need to do. And so with all of that, the privacy claims are pretty poor as a result, particularly in the worst case. So the new way, and the one that I think where Mozilla prefer, is to look at aggregating the information from multiple users and looking at aggregates across multiple users. That way you get very simple reports that cover large numbers of users and can't be connected to individuals. This can support all sorts of different useful metrics, like the number of users, the values of conversions. It's even possible to do some limited machine learning processing, and research continues in this particular area. But the main challenge here is that it requires server infrastructure. So the idea is that the browsers generate encrypted reports. They send them to the websites. The websites are unable to do anything with those encrypted reports, but with the help of a trusted server, they can submit a batch of encrypted reports and get back an aggregate result. that gives them the metrics that they need, number of conversions or the value of the conversions or whatever it is that they seek. Of course, then you have to trust those servers with all of that information. And in a system like this, those servers get access to a lot of information, particularly if you consider the potential for those servers to collaborate or conspire with websites to put more information into those things than possible. You don't want these servers having access to the complete browsing history of an entire population of users. Under those conditions, saying that the server is trustworthy, pinky promise, cross my heart, is not going to cut it from a user privacy perspective. We don't think that claims of that nature are really very reassuring. And so what we're looking to do is to back that trust with strong technical assurances. And of course, that will require strong operational and policy controls to go hand in hand with that one, because there are limitations to the technical assurances that we can provide. So there's two broad sort of things. I'll just sort of skim through these. I know someone talked previously about homomorphic encryption. That is something that has been explored, but I don't know that anything exists that operates at the necessary scale here. The two candidates that we're looking at here is trusted execution environments, which relies on special hardware that's operated by Intel and AMD, or ARM, I think, has an equivalent as well. You essentially run a special processor that has some hardware level guarantees that it won't leak the information that it's processing, and you run specific software in that hardware that can then be given access to the decryption keys, so it can look at the raw data, perform whatever processing you need to generate the aggregates, and off we go. From our perspective, more promising here is a technology called multi-party computation, which in the last 5 years has really kind of exploded as communication costs and computation costs have come down to the point, and the technology has started to mature. The idea here is that you have multiple servers that cooperate to perform calculations, but the inputs to the calculation is not revealed to anyone, not even the servers themselves. All you have to do to ensure the system is secure is trust that one of the servers is honest in the two-party system. We're actually talking about having three-party systems where 2 out of 3 have to be honest. But the idea is that if the servers don't conspire to reveal the inputs remain a secret, and all that you learn is the answer. And in fact, the only person that learns the answer is the person who asked the question in the first place. So a bit of simple addition that's happening on the slide there. And I think some of this math's really very simple when you get right down to it. It's kind of shocking how cryptography is usually far over my head, but this stuff I can understand. So there's a lot of promise here. Relative trade-offs. Both of these are relatively recently matured. TE does give you better performance at a relatively good price, but it does require a very specific threat model. If you have physical access to the hardware, all the guarantees break down, for instance, which means that we have a stronger preference, I think, for multi-party computation. Those multi-party computation gives you strong guarantees based on cryptography, but I will note that this is still largely underside, and we may end up with both of those as outcomes. Everyone loves differential privacy. You don't get a system like this that works in the aggregate without making some allowance for the potential for things like Sybil attacks, where people engineer the queries in such a way that they can ask differential questions like, what is the sum for all of the users, and what is the sum for the users except this person, and then difference the answers to get the value for that individual person and compromise their privacy. This is particularly important in the browser setting because running browsers is easy. We give away browsers for free. They run on any hardware and are designed to be easy to run. And we generally don't authenticate browser users. That's not great for privacy. So it's very easy in these conditions to generate fake inputs to a system like this. And that makes it a little bit more challenging to protect privacy without something like differential privacy. And differential privacy has its limitations, but we believe that a little bit of differential privacy noise may go a long way to help making the systems actually deliver on the privacy guarantees, even under adversarial conditions. So the basic idea is that the differential privacy adds a little bit of noise so you can be uncertain about the extent of any individual contribution to the outcome. One of the nice things about differential privacy with an aggregate result is that the noise that you're adding is proportional to the contributions from one person. And when you have lots of people involved, that can be very small relative to the overall result. And so more users equals relatively less noise. And that's something that I think is a good property to look for in a system like this, where we're looking to aggregate from a lot of people. Of course, differential privacy is great under the control conditions. It's not particularly good over time. And so if we are building a system where advertisers need to continuously make queries about their campaigns over time, the noise that's being added can be erased by making multiple queries over time for the same people. The current view on this is that likely some amount of privacy leakage over time will be unavoidable. But it may be possible under these conditions to make it expensive to target individuals for the purposes of compromising their privacy. It's probably not economically feasible for even large companies to spend lots and lots of money and lots of queries trying to uncover the contributions of one individual person and link them across websites, when the value of that information is less than the cost that they would need to pay in order to make those queries. So just to briefly touch on some of the proposals, we talked about at the event level things. Apple has PCM. I believe that there's rumors of them having an aggregated system proposal as well, which will be interesting to see. Google has a number of different proposals here that sort of cover the entire spectrum of possibilities, event level things with the limitations that I talked about, MPC and TE options. I've been working with the folks at Meta or Facebook on interoperable private attribution, which is an MPC-based system. And Microsoft has a number of proposals in this space as well. Probably most notable is their masked block proposal. So one of the key questions that we're talking about is whether the matching of the events across websites happens on the device in the browser, or it happens outside the browser in the aggregation system. And that's one of the sort of key questions. There's a number of trade-offs here. If you consider the fact that conversions are rare, if you do the matching in the browser, then you get far fewer reports to deal with. But it also makes the fraud detection much more challenging and introduces delays and other problems like that. Whereas the IPA system that we're working on, a lot of the reporting happens through existing logging mechanisms, but then MPC servers do the matching up of events, which requires simpler integration largely at some levels, and less delay. And you're able to more extensively rely on the existing anti-fraud techniques that you have. This work is kind of an ongoing concern. It's across a number of different public forums. I've got some links there. I can provide slides later if people are interested in participating in the work. But the status here is that this is under active discussion in a number of bodies. The various pieces are being spread across different forums based on expertise. But the measurement work, I think, is probably the work that is most mature at this point. briefly talk here about reach and frequency before I break for questions. Reach is measuring how many people have seen an ad. Frequency is measuring how many times people have seen the ad. And both of these serve an important role in advertising, particularly as we get into some of the later things. But it is possible that we don't need good estimates of reach and frequency in order to be effective. There are some privacy preserving techniques that are being worked on by, I think, the World Federation of Advertisers that use multi-party computation to manage this, but there are also statistical models that rely on things like panels and various other baseline systems that allow you to estimate things like audience overlap and other things like that. And it's also possible that some of the attribution systems that we talked about can be enhanced in various ways to measure reach and frequency and sort of do the one-sided counting system. But those are things that will be discussed at a later date, I suspect. And I see I've got a lot of questions here, so maybe we can go through some of the measurement questions.
So let me start from the bottom up because that's probably most recent. What timeline and adoption rates are we looking at for IPA?
So right now in the standards forums, we're still discussing the different options. There's ongoing debate about whether doing attribution on the device in the browser or doing it in an MPC system is really the best outcome for everyone. And so we're still in the process of deciding, but we have research prototypes of IPA, and there's no live deployments of things. There's a lot of work to be done before these things will be ready. I'll talk about timelines a little later as well.
Google has made some commitments to the UK CMA on privacy sandbox to proceed with it. What are your thoughts on these commitments?
I don't have an hour, I'm afraid. This is a detailed topic. You can probably infer some of the conclusions from the material that I'm covering here. Mozilla has provided extensive comments on the CMA commitments, and I'd probably refer people to those instead.
What assurances should a user look out for to know that they can trust a particular server?
Yes, I didn't really talk so much about what it means to trust a server, but I think this is a very important question because this is going to be aggregated systems. It's most likely that there's going to need to be some sort of centralized selection of the trusted servers in order to operate this. And so there'll be most likely there'll be an independent governance body that's set up in order to oversee the operation of trusted servers, set their operational parameters and guidelines and things like that. So from a user perspective, while we will offer opt-outs, the selection of servers that are trusted for the purposes of running aggregation will be something that browser vendors and the industry at large will decide, and not individual users. Because if everyone chose their own server, then they'd be aggregated in a group of one and wouldn't see any privacy advantage out of any of that. I realize that's not necessarily a satisfactory answer for some people, and encourage those people to opt out of these systems, which is something I'll talk about later.
How would ad targeting work with aggregated data?
This is a really interesting question. I think it's a good one. So the aggregated data will be more in the feedback mechanism. So when you talk about doing ad selection and targeting, there will be some amount of information that you'll be able to use on a per ad placement, ad inventory basis. But the information that you get in terms of feedback about the performance of advertising will likely be aggregated. And so you will learn aggregate information of the sort that this particular type of targeting resulted in this particular outcome as compared to this other type of targeting criteria produced a different sort of outcome. One of the things that was kind of encouraging to see was that Criteo did some machine learning research on aggregated data that was differentially private to a fairly reasonable degree, and found that if you have some good baseline data to train off, the aggregated data can be used to enrich the baseline data and produce relatively good machine learning outcomes as a result. So people are doing research in this area. There's a lot of work to be done, obviously, but some of it looked quite encouraging.
There's a question saying that if I don't want my browser to generate attribution reports for advertisers, will this mechanism allow me to opt out? Can it be opt-in?
Yeah, so the question of opt-out versus opt-in is one that's constantly being debated here. I think from the perspective of providing a system that allows advertising to be functional for a large number of people with reasonably good baseline guarantees, we would like ideally for this to be an opt-out system. So by default, people would participate in the system, but would be given the option to opt out. But participation would involve very strong privacy guarantees by default also. So a lot of the debate right now is about the nature of the contract that's being entered into as a result of having people opted in. And there's also a lot of debate about whether this is legal in various jurisdictions and all of those things. I expect this to take a little time to settle. But ultimately, our goal is to ensure that whatever system exists is good enough from a privacy perspective that we would feel comfortable with people participating by default. But of course, we always want to offer people the maximum amount of control over their personal information. And if they feel that the privacy guarantees don't suit them or are not strong enough, then we will definitely offer ways for people to opt out. And one of the things that we're looking for in particular is ensuring that advertisers aren't in a position to discriminate based on someone's choice to opt out. And that's something that we're enshrining into the system as well.
Many websites offer removing third-party cookies, but mandate core cookies. Does that, in the end, end up bringing the protect personal data approach back to square one?
Yeah, so this is a question about the treatment of cookies, and I don't know that this is entirely in line with the sort of proposals that we're talking about. So when we're talking about these systems, none of these rely on the use of cookies at all from a website perspective. It should be possible to operate a functional advertising system that doesn't depend on third-party cookies and only uses these modern techniques. So I don't see this as square one or anything like that at all.
You noted that there is no guarantee that PS proposals are good. How does one ensure that PS proposals are good? Does this require regulatory evaluation, public feedback, or both?
The only way to guarantee that they're good is to participate, I think, and that's one of the things that a number of people have been doing. We've got engagement from civil society and other browser vendors in the process in public standards forums, and those public processes are very important to the outcomes here. One of the things to realize here is that Google have a particular set of incentives around these things that may not lead to the privacy outcomes that you might desire, and engagement with those processes is necessary to sort of ensure that the privacy properties of the system meet with expectations.
Does deleting the advertising ID on Android or iOS help reduce tracking? How effective is this, or is this just a facade?
Yeah, so I think we talked about that briefly in the previous section. Deleting cookies, regenerating your advertising IDs on various platforms, does have some effect, because a number of people who are doing tracking do rely on these identifiers. But at the same time, there's a move to using other techniques to link activity to the same person, and so that those techniques won't be affected by those changes. You will have to make your own risk assessment on those ones, like you said before, probabilistic.
How common is scraping of data from Google images and Facebook profiles, personal data, for the purpose of targeting? Is this legal? Is there a way to stop this?
I have no information on these practices.
Okay.
Or they leak out.
I think we can move on and perhaps leave the legal questions for.
Sure. I just want to do a time check. Okay, we're good, I think. Short section to come. The next section here, I'm going to talk a little bit about targeting, and I won't talk anywhere near as extensively about targeting. I think that's not a subject that is as mature or as clear-cut as the measurement piece. I think there's general agreement that measurement is good, but the targeting piece is far more controversial. So when we talk about targeting criteria, I shared the taxonomy before. So who are we showing the advertising to? This is the sort of demographic information we talked about previously, what their interests are, things like gender, age, income, sexual orientation. There are a vast number of characteristics that people in the industry claim to be able to attribute to individual people and use for targeting purposes. And there's also a large number of proxy things, and we can talk about that if you really want to, but I'd rather not. Then there's the contextual information. So what is the person viewing at this particular point in time? Is the ad going to be put next to an article about plane crashes? Well, maybe you don't want to bid on your plane flights for that article. So understanding the context in which the ad is going to be displayed is critical for targeting in some cases. And then there's the what did this person do in the past? And this might use activities on the same site. So your behavior on a particular website, the things you do there, or it might use information on other websites if tracking is involved, or there's some way to connect your activities across different websites, as we talked about. So what we tend to see is all this information being treated as what are called features and just fed as inputs into machine learning algorithms that form the backbone of the ad selection mechanisms. So you will take all of this information, as much information as you could possibly gather about all of these different things, and sort of turn them into machine interpretable inputs to a machine learning algorithm. And then on the other side of things, the attribution and measurement pieces are used to take the same sets of characteristics and label them. And labeling in machine learning terms is what you use for training. This is your baseline information that says, well, if you target for this particular person, then it leads to a conversion. And if you target for this particular person, then it doesn't, with some probability. And you can feed that into your machine learning algorithm so that it can find those characteristics that are most likely to drive the outcomes that you're interested in. And this entire business is extraordinarily complicated and requires a lot of work and a lot of expertise and a lot of machine time, but it has proven to be very, very effective at producing outcomes in line with good value for advertisers. Of course, once we start talking about privacy in these contexts, the demographic information, as I mentioned before, is no longer possible to access. A lot of the characteristics of people disappears because the privacy preserving techniques sort of cut that off. You don't get identifiers and various other things. You can't connect to offline activities, and maybe you can't connect to activities on other sites. So the amount of information starts to reduce. And so what we're seeing from the Privacy Sandbox initiative and some of the related proposals in the space is trying to find ways to substitute alternative sources of information. So we're sort of seeing this interest-based targeting thing on one side, and on the other side, the activities that you've taken on other websites, and trying to find ways in which that can be used to feed these algorithms. So without tracking, you only have information from the current site and information that was provided to the current site. With tracking, you potentially are able to connect activities across multiple sites. And as we talked about before, you can also connect to offline sources. So if you're providing your phone number to a restaurant, the restaurant can submit that information to a data broker and connect that up to your online profiles and use that information. There's a bunch of different things that involve the sale and use of personal information in sort of more or less an offline context. And this also applies across apps in app stores when we talk about Android and iOS for that purpose. And so some of those pieces are going to go away. Some of them will continue to be useful depending on what techniques people continue to employ. Ideally, none of this tracking stuff happens, but we know it likely will. Under the new regime, the labels that you get from the attribution system won't be on a per event basis, they'll be aggregated. But as we've seen, it is possible to deliver reasonably good results with aggregated information, even differentially private aggregated information, with minor degradations in the efficiency of the overall system. So let's talk about interest-based targeting. Probably the strongest candidate in this area, probably the only candidate in this area that I'm aware of, is Google Topics. They originally proposed Flock for sharing interests, but have moved to a topics-based system. The Topics infers your interests from your browsing history. And so over a given week, the browser will record what websites you visit and will use the set of sites that you visit to pick top 5 topics for that week for you. And more visits to sites on a particular topic will drive things up into that top 5. And then any site can ask for the set of interest topics that someone's expressed an interest in through their browsing activity, and one topic will be provided for each of the last 3 weeks if one is available. And so this allows a website to take these interests as input to their machine learning algorithm or their ad selection algorithms and maybe show ads related to those interests. By the way, there's like currently 350 or so different interests. So that'll give you an idea of the sort of level of granularity of information here. So the idea here is that sites might learn something about your interests based on your activities on other websites. They also might learn nothing. If you're on a website that's about sports and it learns that you're interested in sports, that's probably not of much use to it. And so there's a question about the utility value that sites derive from these sorts of things. One of the things that's kind of challenging in this space is not revealing topics that end up being sensitive. So the set of topics that are available are quite limited and are manually curated down to avoid sensitive topics that people might not like random websites to learn about them. But it's also possible that the website learns something new and unexpected about you and can use that information to better inform the choice of ads that they are able to display. Probably the most interesting and controversial aspect of this proposal is that Topics only reveals a topic to a website if that website has seen it before. for that particular user. This one's really, it's kind of challenging to understand this one, but as you browse through the web, if a particular website is embedded in multiple websites, it will be present for a visit to a website on topic A. And so topic A then becomes available to it in the future. So if you imagine a user has selected topic B as one of their top topics that they're going to share with websites. Topic B won't be available to a website until that website has been present on a visit to a website that has topic B. So if topic B is sports and the user is browsing, say, a shopping website and a news website and another news website, this third-party ad vendor will not be able to see that this person is interested in sports until they visit a sports website and that third-party ad vendor is present on the loading of that page. That's a weird requirement, and it is all driven by a desire to retain some of the properties of third-party cookies. So if you think about this little yellow bug as being a third-party cookie, then you can sort of imagine that the third-party cookie is accumulating this knowledge about the different topics just by being present on a number of different websites, and then later can access that topic. I think it's silly, but the idea is that you're not providing new information that couldn't already be gained by using cookies. So when Google thinks about their proposals, they think about them from the perspective of, is this worse than cookies? And if it's worse than cookies, then they don't want that to happen, and they're seeking ways to prevent this from being worse than cookies in some ways. So they're trying to avoid releasing information that couldn't be gained using third-party cookies. But of course, there's only one browser that enables tracking with cookies, and every other browser currently blocks third-party cookies. And so for them, any amount of information is worse than their current state. So this really only means something if you're Google Chrome. But in practice, what this does is it creates a structural bias in the system. If you're a very large actor that can be present on a large number of websites, you'll be in a position to witness the user visiting a lot of different topics. And that will give you access. You'll be able to unlock a larger slice of the topics that particular person might be interested in. If you're not a big player, then you won't be able to access all of these topics, and that will leave you disadvantaged relative to those who are already in a position to be present on a lot of web pages. So this has led to a lot of discussion about workarounds and centralized brokers and all sorts of weird incentive structures. But the upshot is, we don't think this is a particularly good requirement, but it's an important thing to consider when looking at these things, is what sort of structural bias might be inherent in the design. From a privacy perspective, topics is a little slippery. So the user will be picking 5 topics for a week out of in the order of 350 different topics in the taxonomy. This is just Google's draft topic taxonomy, which exhibits all sorts of cultural biases and all sorts of other problems. But it gives you an idea of the order of magnitude. Just looking at the number of combinations of topics that someone might show an interest in, there's more combinations of topics than there are humans on the planet by an order of magnitude, which means that it's possible that your particular set of topics that you're interested in is unique to you and would uniquely identify you if a website could learn the complete set. Now, obviously, there'll be a lot of overlap between people who have common interests, and there may be some sort of combinations of topics that not represented at all in the population. But what Google tries to do here is randomly choose the set of topics to share with websites. And even 5% of the time, they'll just pick one at random from the entire list without any mind to the top 5. And then, of course, there's the witness requirement that I talked about. The other thing to note here is that sensitive topics have been sort of filtered out of the system. So there's no really truly controversial things that are sort of universally regarded as sensitive. But of course, sensitivity is contextual. If it comes to light that I visit a website for my employer at work, and they learn that I have an interest in jobs and education, specifically job hunting, then that might be something that I'd rather not have my employer learn about me as a result of engaging in these things. So even though jobs and education is not considered sensitive, in that particular context, it may in fact be. And so this leaves me in the situation where I'm not really sure what the privacy properties of this system are. And it's very hard to be confident about exactly what the outcomes are here. Any questions on that before I move on to retargeting?
I don't think there are any questions, Martin. And honestly, it kind of went over my head. It seems the topics portion in particular is very complex for me.
It's about to get worse, I'm afraid. This retargeting thing is, I'm not going to have a lot of time to talk about this, and it is difficult to understand. So the idea is to try to get a high level sense of where things are going. If people have questions, I'm happy to field them offline. So retargeting. So this is all based on your previous actions, whether it be on the same website or usually on different websites. So if you have tracking involved, this is the business that a lot of ad tech companies have built their wealth on. For instance, someone views an article about a particular product, and later ads are shown to them for that particular product on a different website entirely. And this is all currently enabled through the use of tracking technologies and cookies and that sort of thing. That's likely to go away once cookies and tracking starts to diminish in utility. The thing is, retargeting can be extraordinarily effective for things like overcoming purchase hesitancy. It can recognize and capitalize on interest in things like products or product categories. Conversion rates for retargeting and the sort of the price of advertisements that use retargeting can be extremely high, particularly for high value products like finance or automobiles or travel, things that have high gross margin in particular, particularly valuable, and prices for ads can be very high, which means publishers can make a lot of money off retargeting. Unfortunately, retargeting is also often perceived as quite disturbing. You see people find this notion that one casual glance at a particular product will follow them around the web for days afterwards as the vendor of that particular thing tries to retarget them for advertising. And it sort of reinforces this idea that you're being constantly surveilled. And so you hear these anecdotes of people saying, well, we were having a conversation with friends on the bus, and suddenly I saw an ad for that on my phone. When I looked 10 minutes later, is that me being surveilled? And chances are that's just pattern recognition on their part. I don't believe that anyone currently monitors conversations on buses or what have you, but that's the sort of thing that comes from having systems like retargeting that have these properties. people don't understand how the system works, and so they create these mythologies around how the system operates that sometimes don't really match with reality. The other thing to realize about retargeting is it is technically extraordinarily challenging to maintain privacy and enable the sort of ad selection based on previous activities, because the ad selection depends on very specific information about actions that you've taken on other websites. It's extraordinarily difficult to protect the privacy of someone, particularly if you're trying to maintain this contextual integrity where what you do on one website doesn't leak across to other websites. And so under those conditions, it also becomes difficult to do all of the measurement processes, because the steps you have to take in order to protect that information make it harder to do all of these other things. And this is also an area that is the most thickly contested in terms of different ideas and proposals. And there's been a long history of different ideas in this space. Probably the strongest contenders here, I'll go over briefly, is Fledge. This is Google's proposal. Their basic approach is to keep all the private information about browsing actions and whatnot in the browser. But as you move across different websites can ask the browser to store information privately about your actions. And then later, the browser runs an ad auction in the browser that uses all of the data that's been collected by websites and follows the logic that the websites dictate to run an ad auction. And then the browser shows an ad, but prevents the websites from actually knowing what happened during the auction. They don't know what ad was shown necessarily, and they don't get to do anything other than just request that the auction occur. And then in order to provide the sort of feedback about which ads won the bid and all of the attribution stuff that we talked about previously, there's sort of aggregated systems that anonymize all of this information and bundle it up so that advertisers can do the accounting that they need to do. There are some server components involved in providing this as well, and without getting into detail, this aspect of the design is quite challenging as well. So the alternative approach, which kind of builds on Fledge and extends a bit, comes from Microsoft. They're talking about having a trusted server that handles the ad auction and all of the private information. And the advantage of having that server do that is then it can apply some of these centralized privacy notions to the handling of data, and it can enforce sort of minimum participation rates and apply differential privacy, aggregate information together so that the information that it provides is a lot more appropriate. But it can also engage more effectively with the advertisers and get more relevant advertising for the moment. Of course, this also builds on Fledge and takes into account some in-browser isolation features that were pioneered by Fledge. And of course, these are all ideas, not reality, but we'll see how this works. So the basic operation of Fledge, in the simplest possible terms that I can manage, is as you browse the internet, you visit different websites, and those websites register actions that might be of interest to advertisers. So viewed an article on hats might be an action that they ask the browser to remember. And along with that, the website can provide some candidate ads that go along with that action. So there might be some ads for hats that the browser then stores ready for display later on. And this might happen a number of times. Later on another website, that website is looking to do an ad placement. They can ask the browser to perform an ad auction. And they might provide some contextual based ads to show to enter into the competition with all of the behavioral-based advertising that is going on. The browser then executes an auction based on the guidance that is provided by the website and picks the winning bid. And the browser then can show the ad on the web page, but the website that's showing this ad doesn't know which ad was picked. And the browser then has a whole bunch of reporting machinery that allows it to report back to the advertiser to do things like billing and other things, which I haven't shown on this one because that's massively complicated also. So that is just a brief textual description of what happened on the previous slide. Most important thing to note here is that the information that the browser stores is accumulated across multiple websites. And so that information is highly private and sensitive. And the browser uses that information to execute the auction. So the website can provide JavaScript or code that executes in this thing, that looks at the private data, makes bids based on the information that it gets, but it can't send that information to itself in any way. The only thing that happens is that the browser then gets to choose an ad, and the winning ad is shown to the user, but not the website. So that's challenging. You need very, very strict controls on how the information is released out of the system. And the website can't learn what ad was shown directly. But of course, the site needs to get paid for showing this ad. It needs to know how much money was supposedly bid to show this ad. And of course, the advertisers want to perform attribution. They want to know if this ad's working. They want to know how many ads were shown and all those sorts of other things. So there needs to be an aggregated, anonymous system for gathering this information and providing it to these parties. And so the measurement systems that we talked about before become part of these proposals. So you have a measurement system that is layered on top of all of this ad auction technology. Technically, this is massively complex, and it builds on a bunch of essentially entirely new technologies. So the isolated storage that's cross-site and runs special bidding logic for advertisers is entirely new. And there's new research required in order to get that to work. I've talked to researchers. It is in theory possible to do this sort of thing, but it's extraordinarily challenging and has not been done as far as I'm aware. It relies on servers in order to prevent the choice of ad from being used to identify people. You have to ensure that the same ad is shown to a sufficiently large number of people that they can't be uniquely identified just to the choice of ad, because at some point you're going to be reporting which ads were shown to people. And if one ad was shown to one person, that person then can be identifiable if you're not careful. You, of course, need the aggregated systems for reporting all of these things and doing attribution and whatnot, which sort of leans back on the previous measurement work that we talked about. And then, of course, there's entirely new technology for rendering an ad without the web page knowing what was put on the screen. And that requires special new types of iframes, and it probably requires bundling of content, because if you let that iframe talk to servers to ask for content to display, then that will leak the choice of ad that was being made. So the ads need to be entirely self-contained so that they can be shown on the screen without leaking information about what's being shown to people. All of these things are basically new and need to be invented from scratch and proven out. And some of these are quite challenging.
We have a couple of questions, Martin, but we do need to wrap up quickly.
Yeah, I'm getting close to the end. Parakeet is worse. and more complicated than that one. I won't go into any details there. I think I'm nearing the end of this one. So there's a lot of hard questions here, unproven, complex technical solutions, lots of policy challenges around here that I didn't really talk about, no easy answers. So unfortunately, the hard thing here is some businesses might not be viable without this sort of technology, or might not continue to be viable without this sort of thing. And so we've got a bunch of really difficult questions to ask about targeting in general, and retargeting in particular. So questions?
I have one, Martin, in terms of why would an advertiser trust a browser-based opaque auction?
Evidence suggests that they won't, and this remains a point of contention in these technologies as well. That's an excellent point.
Okay. Divyang has two questions. One is, does having all this privacy logic baked into the browser alter the security attack surface?
Absolutely. All of this complexity means much more attack surface for sure. Yep.
Okay. What incentivizes advertisers to participate in this system? And I think he's talking about Fledge, and not continue tracking people the way they currently do.
Yeah, so as we talked about, there's a number of technical mechanisms that are preventing people from being able to track in various ways. And so tracking becomes less viable under those circumstances. So that may be an incentive to do that. The other is simply the sorts of things that we talked about and other people have talked about, is that privacy and respecting privacy and building trust with the customers is a very large part of some people's strategies. And to the extent that privacy is valued by companies, they may wish to participate in these sorts of systems simply to reassure their customers that they're not abusing their privacy through tracking.
The last question, Martin, would be that there is, as you've indicated, there is a lot of activity going on. How does one keep track of all these multiple fora where these conversations are happening, and how this conversation is evolving?
Yeah, so the primary venue for discussion of these ones now is the W3C at this point in time. There's a lot of talk in other forums about developing the technologies and protocols and other pieces that will be necessary, but that work really hasn't started in earnest yet. The W3C is the place that's happening, and I referred to earlier in the slides the Private Advertising Technology Community Group, which is open to participation from anyone, and no membership fees or anything. Just turn up and express your opinion. That's a great place to start and having these discussions. So how much time do we have before I wrap up?
We're about 12 minutes over time.
Well, I'll leave it there. I can.
If you have any closing comments, Martin, please go ahead.
This is the only one that I have, which is, yeah, we're going to do what we can to stop people from tracking. We expect tracking to be less viable, and regulators are also joining us in this effort we're seeing worldwide, which means that users are being given greater autonomy and greater control over their privacy, and we're seeing people are exercising their choice to opt out.
Thanks, Martin. Thank you for taking so much time out to explain this to us. There are parts of this that I did not understand that I'm going to revisit, but thank you for explaining all of this to us, and thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you all for joining us. This brings PrivacyNama to a close. It's a conference where we covered privacy for children, cross-border data flows, the battle between privacy and competition law, government access to data, the role of data protection commissioners, the lives of chief privacy officers. Today we discussed the need for advertising to respect privacy. We discussed some tools that enable privacy, both from a consumer side as well as from a business side, in terms of managing their data and the privacy contained in that data. And we ended this with a workshop by Martin on the developments to preserve privacy in advertising, while still trying to enable some semblance of attribution and measurement. If you wish to revisit any session at PrivacyNama, we have the videos up on YouTube. Please feel free to share them as well to those who might be interested. We'd like to thank Walmart, Meta, Amazon, and Mozilla for their support. We're thankful to CCG at the National Law University, Delhi, the Center for Internet and Society, India, and the Advertising Standards Council of India as our partners for PrivacyNama as a whole, and also to Mozilla and ASCI for the support for the workshop. Thank you all for joining us. We will have stories and articles on the deliberations up on MediaNama later this week and next, and the videos are there on YouTube for you to watch at any point in time. Thank you.